And good evening. I'm Mitch the Ripper, and tonight it's going to be a bit of a switch up from my usual shtick. Tonight I'm going one-on-one with Jeremiah Tux, also known as Insanity is Free. I forgot what I was going to say next. See, I butchered it already, man. I do this every time. But at least I got your name out there, and I think I got it right.
Yep. Yeah.
Go for it, man. Tell us a little bit about your position as far as most people would look at me or hear me and assume that I'm a constitutionalist because I'm big on the Bill of Rights, and they're correct. It's a simple way to get my point across without having a conversation. For your purposes, what is the simple way of getting your point across without the conversation?
I'm an anarchist.
Now, which kind of anarchist would that be?
Well,
because I've heard of two groups here most recently, the anarcho-capitalist and the anarcho-communist.
Well, to me, I'm a coalitionist anarchist. I prefer capitalism, but there are a lot of people who don't. And so my idea is to try and bring as many people together as possible against all governments, all form of governments, and all form of anything that normally associates itself with government. So that's my general idea.
Okay.
So I prefer capitalism, but I would be fine in an environment, that was still not government, but also not capitalism, if they could work it without forming a new state. Which, the reason I prefer capitalism is I doubt that. But for me, for my money, as long as there's no government, that's the society I want.
Now, see, I actually go along with a lot of that, because I can see where our government in the state it's in now is engaged in some of the most incredibly freakish overreach, especially in relation to the restrictions placed upon it by the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And I think one area that I think most people can agree with that about is in policing. Because if there was ever a useful, I don't want to say useful idiot, because I'm not immediately anti-cop. I just noticed some things that I think should be addressed. And one thing I notice is that I think our police forces are a little too obsessed with their own safety. What do you think about that idea?
Well, they're certainly obsessed with their safety. And part of the problem is that, if they're obsessed with their safety, then they stop being obsessed with ours. That's a huge problem as far as I can see.
Yeah, and I would completely agree with that assessment. I had to switch some things around on screen here because I was catching you visually on the Hangout and visually on the stream, and it was completely screwing up my head, just visually. It's kind of like when we get the echo when we do these things. Only a visual version.
Yeah.
But
I don't even know what the echo is right now, because it didn't stop when you had your mic muted. I don't know what that is. I'll just mute my mic when I'm not talking.
That's weird. Anyway, let's try to get through this, I suppose, through the echo. Oh God, it's an echo chamber. That's a terrible joke. So we basically agree that I think that we basically agree. I mean, you would have a situation where there's no policing whatsoever, at least as far as government is concerned. Would I be correct in that?
Pretty much, because the idea of a peaceful and free society, it sort of requires the idea that people police themselves and are mostly non-aggressive, but it also requires the idea that any policing you get comes from an ethical source, and it's certainly not ethical to have an organization that from the top, unilaterally can dictate, this is no longer societally acceptable, this is no longer allowed. And so a private police force would be pretty much limited to rights protection and elimination of conflict by, like, trying to mitigate it rather than trying to add more, because policemen often add more conflict than they prevent, and that's a shame, because like they're supposed to be there to enforce the law, not have like laws broken and then clean up the mess. They're not theoretically janitors, they're theoretically there to protect people. But the Supreme Court recently, not recently, maybe a couple of years ago, said that that's not even their job anymore. So to me, the public police have completely been outmoded by their own edicts.
Yeah, and that's, I do kind of have a slightly different take on that. Is I don't think the police should be out there. I don't think they should necessarily be patrolling. I mean, I can understand doing random patrols, a couple of random patrols per shift, but I almost think they would be more effective. I mean, if we stick with the government-run policing like we do now, I almost think they'd be more effective if they operated more like the fire department does, in that they're at a specific location, centralized preferably, geographically speaking. And when they get a call, they can run right out instead of hoping someone's in the area and waiting 11 minutes until someone's dead before they can respond.
Well, so there's different sorts of like patrols as well. So you get your patrols where the cops are looking for crime, and that's going to end up with a lot of people that may be innocent getting caught in the crossfire because they're looking for crime, and they'll probably find it, especially with the tons and tons of edicts on the books. So you've got that problem, and then you've got the problem that if they do patrol, they're not patrolling for for your interests. They're patrolling for the interests of their precinct. When Vipers patrols, they patrol more ethically, I believe. They patrol neighborhoods that they've been told to patrol, because those neighborhoods have paid for protection, and those neighborhoods that have paid for protection get normally much better service. But they also go out to specific locations with armed escorts, and it's relatively inexpensive, if I remember correctly.
Well, yeah, and it sounds funny when you say it the way you did, where they people who have paid for protection. There's got to be a better way to phrase that, because it gives that mafia type impression, and that's completely not what we're talking about here.
Right. Well, because if you think though of the government's monopoly on force, then you can also think of their monopoly on all other services. And if they're the only ones who can protect you, because the rest of the people, if they decided to do it, would be breaking the law. Vigilantism is pretty much illegal. Then it is, a monopoly on protection as well. And instead of being paying for protection, the money is extorted from you automatically in the form of taxes, which, a popular libertarian and anarchist slogan is, and taxation is theft. So,
well, actually, I think taxation is extortion.
Well, wouldn't it be both though? Like, you're still stealing something that doesn't belong to you.
Would be. I don't want to. I watched one of your streams where there was a large quibbling over semantics.
Was that
some jokes in about that? Yes.
Yeah, that one was fun.
It's that instant. Yeah, I actually, it looked like you were having a pretty good time.
Yeah,
the other guy was just getting frustrated as hell, but
yeah, well, I don't like to let things get me down. Like, if I'm gonna have a conversation about things that I already don't like talking about, like people who hurt others for a living, then I'd rather have a good time, especially when the other people have already called me a statist on Twitter. Like, I have no problem confronting them with a smirk and the highest level of contempt.
You a statist?
Oh yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, they were essentially. Like, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it's like calling me tall. It just ain't so.
Are you not tall?
Oh God, I'm the world's smallest giant. Is what I like to bullshit myself with. No, if I take a healthy shit and it hurts my back and I'm hunched over, I might qualify as a dwarf.
Well, I don't know. I was expecting to be short when I was growing up, but at this point, I'm pretty average.
Oh, I like being below average. It's great. But, it's one of my old expressions is even in the land of giants, tall people are enlisted to retrieve things from high shelves. So
Hmm.
there's that. So it wouldn't matter. It's all relative, is what I'm getting at there.
Yeah.
Totally off topic.
Well, that's fine. It's
Yeah,
but like
yeah,
the idea
go
the
on.
idea
Go on. I'm sorry.
their idea was that like I was conflating two definitions and my conflation was wrong, but their conflation was right. And to me that's the worst kind of argumentum because when I brought up like what the original borders were and I brought up like how these borders are and what people will assume they're talking about when they talk about border strength and how if they're going to discuss like property lines that
Property
not all
lines.
property lines are borders by those definitions and they just could not fathom any of it to me like and I constantly got go ahead.
I was just gonna say there is that certain point in any discussion where it does sort of break down to quibbling over definitions of words, and like what we just did with theft and extortion, they go hand in hand in a way. I mean,
Yeah,
extortion is theft through threats of violence, basically.
yeah, yeah, and
You know,
go ahead.
and that's what the government does. If they don't steal your, if you say nothing, they're stealing your money outright. If you make a fuss about it or protest it in some way by not paying a tax or something, then it becomes extortion because they have that monopoly on force.
Yeah, yeah,
So
the
it's
fun part
extortion by
about
default.
that the fun part about that conversation is that like okay, so this was my personal like amusement and it's come up in conversations about like that conversation since but essentially what we had there was a failure to communicate and like the idea was like they were talking about immigration issues and they were talking about how we stop the flow of immigration into this country implying America and they were discussing immigration problems as if those immigration problems were what we were addressing when we were talking about borders and if all of that is true then we're not talking about the end of my yard. We're talking about the end of a country that has an
Right.
immigration problem. We're not talking about individuals. We're talking about the immigration into a country. And that's a fact that I don't think they really wanted to look at because if you say, well, no, we're talking about private property borders, then if somebody comes past yours that you don't want there, past your no trespassing signs, then you shoot them, and then they don't get to trespass anywhere anymore. Like it's
In
amazing.
theory, I mean,
Go ahead.
well, that particular person doesn't get to, but and there will be some people in your neighborhood who will be who will find out about that particular protection method you use for your property line, and they will say, "Nah, let's not jump that guy's fence."
Yeah.
But then you will get the random person who comes through who's unaware and does it anyway. I mean,
Well, absolutely, which is why the truth is that most people wouldn't like automatically shoot. They would like warn you. They would say, get off my lawn, blah blah. The sort of normal like property protection shit. And
right,
and when you discuss like borders, you're certainly not talking like property limits because if that was the case, then we all own the country. It's collectively owned, and it's basically like fucking communism or socialism. And I don't think that any like well-meaning libertarian would authorize essentially state-owned border protection. And so I tried to be intellectually honest about it, but they pretty much kept on like changing the terms of the conversation, and
yeah,
it turned into like essentially a semantic discussion where they didn't want semantics. Yeah,
right,
they wanted to discuss semantics, but they didn't want me to discuss semantics, if that makes sense.
yes, it does. It's I've seen it before. I try not to do it, and I have caught myself before. So if I do it, call me out on it, man. Hey, why not? Um, in the chat, we got since we were talking about. I mean, we haven't really gotten into the restricting of government's authority yet. Not into any great detail, but one of the guys in the chat, Fen, asks, I might have to scroll up now. Jesus Christ. He says, I would love to know how we pay for anything like roads and the military without taxes.
Well, I mean, first off, I would ask, like, if all of the costs associated with the roads and the military are things that you would like endorse, and if you wouldn't, then we can both acknowledge that many cuts need to be made. So the price would be nowhere near as high as it normally is. So that changes the base cost. When you're running a business, you need to be concerned with like cost benefit analysis, budgetary concerns and all of that. When you're running the government, you don't need to be concerned with that because you can just get quantitative easing and your big bankster friends will help bail you out. But like the idea is like the cost would be lower anyway. So you start out with a lower base cost because you've cut a lot of the costs, not necessarily corners, but costs definitely. And then you come to the idea of like, okay, so like the leftists would be very happy with this, for instance. If a business wants employees, those employees need to be able to get to their work. And so a business is incentivized to chuck a lot of money at maintaining the roads. And the business is also incentivized to the rest of to fund the rest of the like infrastructure, I guess would be an interesting way to put it, and defense. And so like if their employees don't have running water, if their employees don't have roads, if their employees don't feel safe in their own country because it's really easy to invade, they won't go to work because they'll be too busy boarding up the windows like it's Armageddon. So like the idea of a society where employers say, we've got all this money, but none of it will go to roads or the military or any of that, even though we massively and drastically need it, is absurd. The other idea, is that right-wingers should appreciate is the idea that we are already paying for the roads in the form of taxation. Because if that's the case, if we're paying for the roads already, why the fuck would you stop if you still needed the roads in an anarchist society? Or do you only want the roads as long as they're being stolen from you? Do you only want protection of your nation as long as it's being extorted from you? None of that makes sense to me. If you truly want them, if you truly deserve them, then you will pay for them. And those things are things that appeal to the right. So it doesn't matter like who you talk to, like their argument relying on like road payment and payments for other services is fairly absurd, because what we're talking about is a service, and government, contrary to popular belief, does not have a monopoly on those services.
What about at the well, see, this is where it gets interesting, because when we talk of either restricting or abolishing government, in a lot of cases, I haven't heard many people talk about how you do that at each level of government that exists now, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
Because at a county level, there are road issues. At a state level, there are road issues. And at a federal level, there are road issues.
Yeah, well, because the idea of like my particular thrust of anarchism is decentralization and localization. And the idea is that, yes, there would still be like massive connections between countries and states and et cetera, and the non-state societies as well, because there still needs to be a global commerce. It's gotten too out of control. The only way to stop global commerce would be nuking everybody. So the idea of decentralization and localization means that when you have some service provided by government, you encourage private people to do it. You say, if you do this service, we can transition away from this other service being held by the government. Not necessarily the government would be saying this, because they have obviously a vested interest in maintaining their job titles. But if you, like, as a person, as an individual, agree that this needs to happen, then you could tell, like, yeah, we need a charity in our town. Well, then I'll talk to Susie down the street, who cares about people a lot and is well connected to the church, and she can form that charity. You know, taking the power back individually. And, you know, like, the idea of paving roads being one of the things that you couldn't do individually is sort of absurd, because there are a lot of places in the US with unmaintained roads where people actually live, where if there's, you know, a stiff rain, those places won't be accessible. And so
that was my father, actually. He
yeah,
lived in such a place.
yeah, I grew up in such a place. And so, to me, like, I know intimately that the government doesn't give a shit about a lot of the roads that are there. And so if we talk about, like, how do we deal with roads on a federal level, how do we deal with roads on a local level? Well, we trust the federal government to maintain them just enough so that the people who live in remote areas aren't shafted, and oftentimes they are. So I would say, if you want to make life better for the common person and stop this, like, prison planet, like, centralization mentality of urban areas where everybody is stacked into the same general space, and where, you know, there's no room for basic human essentials, so they have to get it from elsewhere, and where it's very easy for the state to control, because that's, in the end, the reason that they prefer those sorts of living arrangements. It's not because it makes them feel better, it's because it's, like, profitable to the state to have a much easier to control tax farm, you know, like nice little pens, like chickens in a coop, instead of, like, spread out like free range humans. And so, like, if we want, like, realistic change on a positive level, the first step is realizing that the government cares about what areas it can control the most. The most funding, the best funding, will come to the cities, to the urban areas where they can, like, have lockdown control and block in specific people in areas if they sense dissent. You know, they don't want those places because they're efficient. Those places are constantly requisite of, like, huge minute maintenance, and it's very hard to get into the nooks and crannies of places like those, because they're not built for access by multiple people. They're built for, like, you know, one man going into one access tunnel and fixing, like, some wiring or some plumbing or something like that. And it's wildly inefficient when you really think about it. So if you want, like, benefit, like, the benefit of a free society, part of that is going to be better roads, because where the people are, they can pave. Essentially, there are a lot of laws that prevent people on a local level from paving their own roads, from dealing with their own insurance, from, you know, defending their own neighborhoods from you know, enemies, foreign and domestic.
In fact, and it ties into that one way really specifically, and another way on it sort of tangentially. I believe it was in Detroit when it was before it started to make its comeback. If it wasn't Detroit, I think it was in that area. There was they had the parks, you know, the city-run parks, and they were getting ignored by the city. So people went out there with their own riding lawnmowers. One guy in particular tried to go and mow the grass in the park, and the city came in and stopped him from doing it. You know, if that's not an attempt to control, I don't know what is.
That's Detroit. That's, you can actually see about the Lawnmower Brigade in Reason.tv's Anarchy in Detroit series, because like, they don't just do that anymore. I think they do a lot of things. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think they have stepped up into other areas. But there was another one, I think it was in the same state, where someone went by and mixed up their own stuff to fill the cracks in the road, and got either arrested or fined or something for doing that. Yeah. And I think it was shortly after that what people started doing to get these problems fixed was they just started turning the cracks into drawings of dicks.
That's
whatnot,
cool.
would take a can of spray paint and draw a dick around the crack, and then pretty soon someone from the city or county would come by and fill in that crack and get rid of the paint.
Yeah. Well, and you know, the thing is, like, oftentimes people forget that the government stops a lot of the change that it claims to be the only benefit to. Like, government claims that it's the only one who can pave the roads, and it tells every student growing up in its schools that if you know, don't have our protection, there will be no roads, military, police, etc., etc. When realistically, they stop all of those things from happening on the individual level. Like, you know, weird shots fired. Well, I was defending my house. Well, too bad, because now you're going to the morgue too. The cops came and they saw somebody with a gun. Irrational motherfuckers. Yeah. And we're supposed to trust these people to handle all of the facets of our infrastructure and our protection? No, thank you.
Well, actually, I'd say no, don't trust them to. In fact, trust them not to. Trust them to abuse it. You know, basically, trust them, sure, but trust them to be what they are. Don't trust them to be what you want them to be, because that's never going to happen.
But that's exactly what the government asks you to do. You grow up in their schools, they tell you, you know, the U.S. government is great, you know, we're here for your protection. And then they ignore all, like, the kids aren't told about the kid that was just drone bombed that day by Obama's policy, or now Trump's policy. They don't talk about the people that were hurt by the U.S. government, because these are kids and they want to propagandize, not actually educate. So you end up with a society of sheep that's basically, you know, oh, we need the government. Without the government, without this almighty state, we wouldn't have X, Y, and Z. Well, that's really what they want you to believe, absolutely, but it's not true at all.
Well, you know, it's like when we had that big bailout that was happening at the end of Bush and the beginning of Obama.
Yeah.
And I believe it was AIG, the big insurance company, that was getting bailed out. And my father was old, obviously, but just to give you some reference, he fought in Korea, did I think 3 or 4 tours in Korea, and did a couple of tours in Vietnam, and wanted to go back to Vietnam, and they actually told him no, we think you shouldn't go back. And but anyway, that's how old he was. He was around for those conflicts. My dad was actually on the was actually one of the people who tested the M16 when it was first recommended as a new service rifle. And he said no, because it was unreliable. But anyway, that's how far back he goes. And when this was happening with the bailouts, you know, he was saying that, you know, we need these things, that we have to bail them out. We need these things in place. And I argued a simple bit of natural science. Nature abhors a vacuum. You know, if one entity isn't there to serve all those insurance needs, in this case with my father, then another one would pop up to take its place.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what you're saying, is that if we get the government out of the business of handling roads, another business will pop up to step into that place.
Well, or even if you didn't have, like, the government just, like, cut off, then you could have a peaceful transition if you encourage that business to start.
Well, yeah. Yeah, I'm not saying like, you know, write a declaration and be like, boom, okay, you can't work on roads anymore, we're getting these guys instead. Although that would be nice, especially if we were allowed to do a genuine cost analysis on it. This is one of my problems with government is, you know, for people who constantly claim they have nothing to hide, they sure do a good job doing it.
And they have everything to hide, because they're connected to some of the most corrupt, evil families in history. So, you know, they're the ones who have everything to hide.
Yes. I mean, and basically anything the government says, go with the opposite. And a good example is the Affordable Care Act, because it is neither affordable nor does it care.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, so I saw somebody in the chat here. They were saying essentially that nobody ever answers the question like who would you trust? Well, first off, it would require the market to not be quelled. It would require the market to be allowed to pop up, because if we don't know who to trust at this particular juncture, because it's partially because the state hasn't let us see anybody else. That's a huge problem. And it's one that like most statists won't address, because like essentially what you're saying to them is, well, maybe we would help, maybe we could help, but it doesn't help when you try to stop us. You know, like for instance, feeding the homeless is illegal in many places, housing them, etc., etc. You know, unless you're specifically with government permits or whatever. You can't just be a kind person giving somebody food. You have to be a person with government approval giving them food. And so essentially, what I would say to it, who do you trust? Nobody. You don't trust anybody. They could be affiliated with somebody evil, but what you do is you verify every one of their actions as possibly suspicious, but also for somebody's good. Because essentially, if it's not for somebody's good that they're supposed to be serving, then you can tell that it's only for their good. And also, like, allow the markets to arise, because it's not happening yet. Allow the markets to arise and trust nobody, but only by the services that appear to serve your interests the best. Because in the end, they will be out for their interests, and if you want to be out for your own, the first step is not accepting their help as anything other than a means to their own ends. And the idea is to go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think the way to sum that idea up is you trust the people who earn it.
Yes. Well, and maybe, you know, even then, just like be suspicious of everyone, and then like if they do something to earn more trust, then say, hey, yeah, maybe we should stick with these people even if something goes wrong. But if something goes wrong right away, then you know not to trust them at all.
Right. And you know, I hate to say it this way because of the subject we're on, but there will be bumps in the road.
Yes.
I mean, there's no way around that. It's like you said, you have to have well, right now there's just holes in the road.
Now there's entire sections of road that aren't there. You know, and then they justify all these fucking oversights with the idea that we can just shove costs down the line. Like, taxes don't pay for infrastructure or any of this. It's far too expensive. The thing that's paying for it is future generations, or whoever is there when the tax ceiling finally like busts, and people are like, or the debt ceiling finally busts, and people are like, we're not going to tolerate this anymore.
Right. But Fenn brings up another good point again. Maybe we should just hold the government to account. And there are some problems there that I can think of off the top of my head. One in particular.
Go
ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, we're going to play this game. Okay, I'll go. One problem in particular I have, again, is we can't hold them accountable as immediately as we should be able to. I mean, when it comes to, you know, we have to wait however long it is between the incident and the next election. And let's face it, in today's society, most people's memory isn't really that long.
Yeah.
Something else will come up. You know, one of the Kardashians will stub their toe.
But that's the reason it's sort of because the government has it all on lockdown. They have like the media under control. They have commerce under control. They have defense under control, both on a neighborhood and a national level. And all of this is considered fine by the people in government, but the people on the ground are constantly complaining. So the idea of holding the government to account when there is so much that's done and so little transparency is absurd. Like, you can't hold somebody to account if they're not even telling you 90% of what they're doing. It's impossible. So you end up with these people like that control things on a very specific level, and you end up with these people that control them. You end up with like essentially secret societies upon secret societies, and none of it is moderated by anybody, because if they make a profit, what's their goal in stopping the profit from being made?
Right. I mean, what I would like to see, I think there are a couple of steps we can take in that direction that would be a good starting point. For one, the government's got to be transparent.
Which, good luck, because it's not going to.
Oh, I know. This is the kind of thing that would require something on the level of a constitutional amendment in today's, the way shit is now. That's what it would require.
It would require an act of God. They can break the Constitution.
And they do constantly. We'll get into that. Oh, God, time's flying here. This is great. Another thing for the purpose of transparency is one bill, one subject. And what I mean by that is like I'll go back to the Affordable Care Act again. That thing was 1,400 pages long, and it was loaded with shit about measuring the acidity of duck farts in Nebraska on Tuesdays.
Well, and those ride-alongs are always designed to make somebody to sign it.
Yeah, and there's so much non-related bullshit in a bill that goes before the Congress and the Senate that we the people should not stand for that. We should be pushing for one subject, one bill.
Well, and that may be valuable, but like in the end, we've got a society of people that could, say this bill has only one subject and claim that things get better from that, but still have everything handled in backroom meetings. Like the Bilderberg Group doesn't require congressional approval.
Well, no, a lot of what goes on in government is backroom. And
right.
That's another thing that we again, I'm saying under our system, the way it is now, we need a way to make them be transparent. We need to force it. Well, I'm not saying by violent means necessarily, but I am saying that we need to force it.
Well, because there's the thing, like what I like to phrase it as is, violent self-defense. Because if you go, if you say, violent revolution against the state, I did a video on that. It's called the Smith Act. They can throw you out of the country for it. They can strip your citizenship. And so you end up with essentially, if you try to force it with a gag order. Don't talk about, violent revolution. Don't talk about, any sort of thing that the founders would have discussed, not even in back rooms, because whether you're a communist, a fascist, whatever, will stop you. And there's more and more ways that the government can sniff audio, wherever you're talking about it. There's more and more ways that they can peer into your life and see if you're trying to violently overthrow them. So instead of saying
I call those more and more ways, I have a name for them. Windows updates.
Yeah.
Or Google updates. Or anytime anyone updates anything.
Yeah, like when Facebook Messenger was required, it sniffed your Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
But the idea should be then encouraging self-defense, because if you say you have a right to defend yourself and you keep it that vague, there are laws in place to protect your right to self-defense. And unless they want to break the law, which they do regularly anyway, so this may, not even work. If you want legal protection and still want to be able to say what you want to say, then violent self-defense is as far as you can go in that direction. But I say it to everybody, because if I say that, then it's absolutely true. They couldn't stop that unless they decided to do a full fascist crackdown. And they aren't going to do that until dissent starts to crop up. So, I mean, be vigilant because it's going to happen if anything serious happens. But you know, always use violent self-defense as your words.
Yes, because if you phrase it another way, they're going to spin it on you, and they love to spin it on you.
Yep. Yeah, they make a lot of money
to do that.
on you.
Yes, they do.
Well, currency, and then they make money, and we don't get to.
Right. Then there's how is it different than when it comes to military at the federal level for defense of the nation? Because we can't necessarily just rely on a single company to jump in and take that place, can we?
Well, why would you rely on a single company if you're decentralized? I mean, the old thing about like you remember that general who said like there would be a blade of a rifle behind every blade of grass.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So that person was claimantly afraid of invading the U.S. because they thought that there would be violent defense around every corner, and that idea, right? But that was back when people were still bringing guns to school in the trunks of their cars. You know, that was back before there were like barrel length restrictions and gun part restrictions, and essentially a stripping of the Second Amendment down to where it doesn't exist. And so,
I mean, well, basically what they've done is they've taken everything that's black and a little bit scary, and if they apply it to a gun, it's suddenly illegal.
Yeah. And so, but that's the idea, right? Like, if we had a constitutional government, a lot of people, including probably me, would never have become anarchists. And that's what Trump is for a short bit. He's still going to be a tyrant because presidents are. But for a short bit, he's going to appease people who thought that the government expanding would be a bad idea. That's the reason he didn't. That's the reason he got us out of the TPP. The left hated it because environmental restrictions. The right hated it because they were starting to look into conspiracies, and the global organizations that benefited from it were like so embedded in the bill's text that it became Orwellian. So the idea of not going into the TPP, threatening something huge and then taking us out of it, a lot of people are going to be relieved by that, even though likely it's a decision made the whole time to control the American people, to make them more okay with less control, because at least we didn't hit you that hard, you know.
So are you concerned that with Trump in office, what we're going to be looking at is a case of with Obama it was 3 steps forward, but with Trump it's only going to be 2 steps back?
I would say that with every presidential administration, especially with the increase of laws, that it's going to be much more than 3 steps. Much more than 2 steps back. If you want to say 3 steps forward, I would say that it's probably going to be closer to 12 or 16 steps back, because we're talking about like the RD cycle. Where a Republican gets in for 8 years, and then a Democrat gets in for 8 years, and then a Republican, and then a Democrat, and they quell somebody every time. Like Obama was really hard on straight white males in terms of his effect. The SJW curse spread across the United States, and that was a huge problem. But it was a problem created by Obama and his surrounding allies, because the people who are really in control wanted those people controlled so that they could increase the laws on, like, against those things, the things that would be vital to those people, and make it easier on the other people. And essentially, the March of Tyranny, a Ben Garrison cartoon, is in effect, because once Trump is in, which he is now, he can end up signing whatever executive orders he wants. Like people under the Obama administration that were on the right, we're all like, you know, scrambling to read the executive orders texts. But these executive orders, I've seen barely any articles on the actual text. Like, be really suspicious of Obama, but once Trump gets in, it's all a fire sale, and that's the way they can control us.
Yeah, it's basically they keep us pitted against each other.
Yes.
With and they do it no matter who's in office. They do it every year. You could probably, if you're paying close enough attention, you can set your clock by it. They do it with the same things. They do it with abortion. They do it with sexual rights. They do it with gun laws. You know, they keep us fighting against each other while they keep adding more and more authority to their positions.
Right.
Authority over us.
And like my mother always had a decent way of putting it. She would say something like, you know, the government's really good at writing laws, but they are not good at taking them away. And so, like, I would say go a step further than that and say, like, they're good at both, because both of them are designed to increase their power. If they take one law away, it's only because they wrote like 400 more in ride-alongs in the latest like spending bill. Like the National Defense Authorization Act, like removing citizenship or curbing speech or having a giant Stasi of people there for media control. And then Obama leaves, all with a fresh Poland invasion. And I'm supposed to believe that Trump had no foreknowledge of this, that they just handed him like, whoops, you've got a Poland invasion and a bunch of freedom violating things on your hands. Like, whoops. No, the powers that be have much more control than that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And they that's working under the idea that that there is this shadow cabinet at work.
Yeah, the deep state.
And actually I think people will this is where people will brand us as conspiracy nuts.
I'm a conspiracy theorist. I'm proud of that.
Well, that's why I didn't say theorist. I said nut.
I'm a nut. Insanity is free.
Well, yeah, I'm a nut. You know, sometimes I feel like a nut. Sometimes I don't. It's a whole thing. But what they don't seem to realize is that you don't need a formal conspiracy when you have a bunch of people in the same place who have similar interests. You know,
the Bilderberg Group,
for example, or anyone working for George Soros.
Yeah, well, he has representatives in the Bilderberg Group.
Yeah, and Rupert Murdoch, and any of them.
Yeah, especially the media.
They're all like the media is a really good example, actually. You know, they all toe the same line for the most part.
Yeah, and like the press releases, the talking points memos.
Oh yeah,
it's all controlled.
Yes, and Fox and CNN actually do the same job. You know, they come down on different sides of things, sure, but they do the same job, and the one job they do is they serve to divide the people.
Yeah,
and that's why it's a propaganda arm.
Well, and you know, they don't just
and
divide
because
them, they control them on an individual level.
Pardon me?
They don't just divide the people; they control them on an individual level.
Yes, and it's you know, even though they'll like I said, they'll come down on different sides of an issue, but it's usually those same issues that I mentioned earlier. They will, but they'll do that, but they have the same basic self-interest.
They have the same advertisers, that's for damn sure.
Oh yeah, and that's what the self-interest is. It's to get more to flow in their direction. And one good way, if you watch YouTube, if you see some of the little tiny feuds that pop up here and there, that shit is a really good way to generate interest.
Yeah.
And if these media outfits, and I'm going to stick with Fox and CNN, because it's like Coke and Pepsi, you know, they generate that instance. That's why Coke and Pepsi had the Cola Wars way back when. It was an ad campaign that was sort of a mutual thing.
Well, and also, you know, what's really interesting is that when people decided to run the Cola Wars, the companies regularly changed their labels, their ads, their approach, and what they were really doing is they were studying how best to manipulate people. What colors need to be on a screen? Well, red's good, and so is blue. that's what they found out. Red and blue is good to get one sort of person, and red and white is a good way to get another sort of person, but red is necessary. And, then Pepsi came up with universal designs that were designed to basically map general geometry of the universe, and then say, well, we'll find a way to work this into our design. And one of the design elements that they came up with was the idea of a globe. So you have a sphere on the can, and people will see one side of the sphere and recognize it from any angle, on a shelf or in an ad or whatever. And that sort of gets people to recognize that brand and, completely be loyal to it. And that's one of the sorts of things that like gets you into the conspiracy idea, because if Pepsi knows it and Pepsi is beholden to the U.S. government, then the U.S. government knows all of their advertising secrets and can very specifically use those in the same way to manipulate the people in the same way for a political idea. They don't even, and then, just set off a bomb somewhere, have a country's region be destabilized by largely U.S. foreign policy, and all of that happens for the benefit of the elites. They get their campaigns advertised very well because they know how to manipulate people into saying, "Oh, this is scary. Let's be against this," or "This is fine. Let's always trust the people responsible for this." And that sort of like don't trust him, trust me mentality, the sort of abuser cycle, works very well on the base instincts of humanity, to tell them essentially, if we weren't here, you would have terrible, terrible times ahead.
Well, and the best part is running with that Coke and Pepsi analogy. Even if you take the government level out of the way you described it, that means that we have business people who are smart enough to pull some of this stuff off.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have business people who are smart enough to pull that stuff off, we have people who are higher up a certain type of intellectual chain are certainly smart enough to pull that off, or up a chain where, well, let's say, for example, military intelligence type people, people who work in that kind of an area. I mean, part of their job in the intelligence community is to look at what works and see how they can manipulate it and run with it. So even if there's no direct connection there, all they have to do is observe and say, we can do the same thing with Twinkies and a forklift. In Saudi Arabia or Outer Mongolia or something.
Facebook, a lot of their funding comes from people associated with the CIA, DARPA, the NSA, the FBI, and they have Wi-Fi sniffing capability. This is just in Facebook. I'm doing an article on this shortly, and they have Wi-Fi sniffing capabilities, facial recognition, where they've built really complex 3D models of human faces from photos that they've uploaded. Voice recognition. They can scan your voice and the voice in your local room for what music and media you're into at the time,
Yep.
And this is just Facebook. This is just one organization. The whole thing is set up where there's redundancies upon redundancies, and where the government can essentially control things from the top down because there's very little that they aren't involved in.
And even if they can't control, they can certainly monitor, which I guess by default gives them the ability to control.
Yeah, because you can't control something you can't see, really. But also the idea, they had this experiment a while back to see if they could make people's mood worse or better. And the experiment was essentially show them a whole bunch of negative posts and see if their posts get more negative. They did. Show them a bunch of positive posts and see if their posts get more positive. They did. And if they can do that just on a general level, imagine what they can do to influence an election. Imagine what they can do to influence people's choices based on that election. Am I going to this riot that's a planned Facebook event? Am I going to this Trump rally? Well, sure, my friends are, and they're very happy about what he's doing with the country. Or, no, of course not. I'm part of the this organization, and we don't approve of the Trump, you know, white capitalist heteronormative patriarchy, you know, and that sort of idea bleeds into everything else.
Well, see, now this makes me wonder, then why didn't Hillary Clinton get elected?
Well, because Hillary Clinton was their patsy. Of course, she's not going to get elected. We already had a Democrat for the past 8 years. If there was another Democrat, they wouldn't be able to get their policies in that directly affect Republicans. They need a change so that they can make it seem like things are different when they're all the same.
Coke and Pepsi.
Coke and Pepsi.
That's what it is, man. The Fox and CNN, Democrats, Republicans, it's all Coke and Pepsi.
The only difference is libertarian versus statist.
That's
individualist
yeah.
versus authoritarian.
I've actually I boiled it down differently. I called it pro-liberty versus anti-liberty.
Yep.
And they're all kind of the same basic principle: good people versus bad people.
Right. But if you can attach it to like a more concrete idea, like I'm anti-authoritarian, I'm pro-individual, then essentially you can say this person is with these people, maybe be a little bit suspicious, and that's where you start to get into like, I see X-Files jokes in all of my chats. That's where you get into like the idea that there's a huge omnipresent group of controllers that control the controllers. People ask who watches the watchers, who signs their paychecks, who makes sure that they can.
Sorry, I said it in Latin.
Yeah, and who can make sure that they can get home in the end of the day safely, even though they've hurt a lot of people. Who's making sure that their military vanguards don't explode. Well, the people that make sure those things happen are the same people making sure that the world doesn't decide, hey, this country is $19 trillion in debt. That's never getting paid back. But don't shoot us anyway because you need us for your oil. OPEC, they won't trade anything but the Federal Reserve note. And we're supposed to look away from that. We're not supposed to say, hey, Gaddafi and every other major figurehead in the Middle East that said we won't trade in your dollar anymore is somehow dead very soon after saying that. I wonder why. Yeah. And so, you ask how you can trust a private company over the government. If you can't like manage that, how can you manage a private company? Well, first off, in a decentralized world, that private company wouldn't be bailed out. That private company would have to rely on its own wits, and it would take a lot less risks. I'll say that. But beyond that, you end up with an organization of people in a private company, in a truly private company, not associated or connected with any government or anything, that have a fundamental interest in the company continuing. And that means that they probably, in a decentralized society, wouldn't do anything to encourage people to leave and start their own company, which would be much, much easier in a decentralized society. You come up with like people being arrested for lemonade stands in this one. In a decentralized society, yeah, you would see lemonade stands on every corner competing for the lowest price of lemonade. It's fucking like, it's very easy. It's just a matter of finding people willing to start the transition and violently defending yourself when the state says, no, we're going to kidnap and cage you when you start your lemonade stand or your investment firm or your healthcare organization or your militia or your private police, your vipers,
or your fucking canned food drive.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll guarantee you, if I tried to organize a canned food drive, I bet you there's some sort of a regulation I'd have to deal with before I was allowed to do it without being threatened with arrest or a fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why?
Well,
Seriously, I just want one good reason why.
Well, because the government has to be the only preventer of those services. Otherwise, it'll seem like everybody else cares too. And if there's a feeling of empathy in the country, then people will stop being so afraid and the fear mongering won't work and their empire will collapse.
As I said, I wanted a good reason why. Qualifier there being good. I mean, I don't think that's a good reason. I understand it. I'm not saying the logic isn't sound. I'm saying that position is an invalid position for anyone to take.
Any ethical
as far as what yes, an ethical person would not take that position. Therefore, I find it invalid.
Right. Well, an ethical person can't support the existence of the state because it fundamentally requires coercion. There's nothing voluntary about taxation. There's nothing voluntary about inflation. There's nothing voluntary about their global empire or how it comes home after they've hired military people to be cops and after those military people have gotten used to thinking of humans as less than humans.
Yeah, that's a separate problem entirely. I mean, I know why they do it, but it wasn't quite the thrust of where we were going tonight. I think it might end up there. Now I'm rambling. Great. But see that I remember we were talking once before about and you had said, and I'd asked for clarification on this in a chat because I heard you mention it on your show Moment of Rage on journalisticrevolution.com. I had to get that in there. It's a sort of a plug.
Thanks.
No worries, man. You had said that the Bill of Rights and the Constitution are toothless, so we might as well do away with them.
Absolutely.
Essentially, no one's following it in government, so it's essentially a meaningless document.
Well, okay, go ahead.
Bear in mind, I'm something of a constitutionalist. I'm really big on the Bill of Rights, and even I can see your logic there. I mean, I think it's a position that makes a little sense, but the part I can't get past is that I think we need this thing to point to. We need, and it being the thing that is the foundation of our country, that gives it a certain gravitas, if you will, because we can point to it and say, no, bullshit, look at this. Well, and sometimes that works.
Well, okay, so the idea is that, first off, if the state can be restrained by a piece of paper, then it's not very capable of being it's all-encompassing safety, protection, etc. entity, because if there is something that's ethical and found to be ethical that piece of paper restrains, sure, there's an amendment process, but it shows that the original document was imperfect. For instance, theoretically voting was ethical, even though I disagree with that. And women couldn't do it, and non-landowners couldn't do it, and black people couldn't do it, and all of these people were excluded.
The women and black people thing, I think, was more of a was more serendipitous than intent, if you know what I mean, because it was originally landowners could vote, but there just weren't that many landowners who were black or women as there were white men. Right. I think that was in part coincidence.
But when they rewrote the laws to include more than landowners, then that changed, and they changed it to be exclusionary of huge portions of society.
Well, actually, I believe they changed it to. I believe the change they made was that no one who had reached the age of 18 or above would be prevented from voting.
Well, no, man. And I believe that they had restrictions for everybody else as well. Slaves obviously couldn't vote. Why would that be a thing?
Well, yeah.
It was sort of a given.
Yes, it was. That's what I mean by because they never said except for slaves. I mean, that terminology wasn't used, but it was a happenstance of what was written, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I doubt that anyone looked so deeply into it at the time so as to recognize that and care enough to do anything about it at the time.
Well, right, but when you have like this document, either it protects us because there are people who follow it, or it doesn't protect us because people don't follow it. And that means fundamentally, you just need people to be ethical. And if they're not ethical, then there will be problems. And
Yes.
so if there are problems because they're not ethical, then it's not because they're not following the Constitution. And people should have the right to defend themselves from any ethical breach, regardless of whether it's constitutional for them to defend themselves or not. So, like what Lysander Spooner said essentially was that either it created this environment or it's been powerless to prevent it. So, and that was back when it was much, much better in terms of legal rights, when there were many, many, many less laws on the books, like tens of thousands of less laws on the books. Back when he was trying to create a postal service and couldn't even do that. So it was better, but it was still terrible. And now it's much, much worse because people didn't heed his and a bunch of other people's warnings. Spooner, Bastiat, Hayek, all of these people that were around much, much like many years before things like the Affordable Care Act or things like the Patriot Act or even the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 was written after no treason was. And so all of these constitutional breaches, every constitutional law case has always happened, has happened because people rely on those documents instead of an understanding of ethics. It's not about what's right, it's about what the government says you can do. And that's a fundamental flaw in society, I think.
Well, that's why one of the things when I bring up, for example, the Bill of Rights, but not just the Bill of Rights, but all the subsequent amendments that happened after the Bill of Rights, after the ratification. An interesting thing to point out and to notice is that after the 10th Amendment, which was the last one, when the Constitution was ratified, it only had the 10 amendments involved. After the ratification, when they started adding more amendments, the language got more and more complicated.
Yep.
And there's I can only think honestly of one reason to do that, and that is for the sake of confusion. And it's like creating job security for attorneys.
Well,
so
and
that
not
the
just
common people. My point being that the Bill of Rights was there as something that the common man could understand, and that common man understanding over time had gotten further and further away from the people who were writing these amendments. And even if you look at any law now, anything written in the last, say, 50 years, it's convoluted as hell.
Because they can.
Well, it's because they want to, it's a means to control.
Well,
it's control through confusion.
And that's part of the thing. If they can make things so confusing that people who even have this fundamental and basic understanding of how society works, et cetera, how these laws are put in place, or even just the Bill of Rights, if they can make it so confusing that most people won't look into it, then they can add whatever they want to it. And most people won't see it. And that means that exactly. If you say like, you can't do that, I have rights. Well, okay. Not if the government says you don't. Sorry.
And George Carlin pointed out that if you want to know about your rights, just go to Wikipedia and punch in Japanese Americans 1942.
Yeah.
And learn exactly what your rights are worth.
Yeah,
there's and he's got a good point there. I mean, that is a really good example of when the Bill of Rights was completely tossed aside.
Or when the president gets to authorize war contracts, or when an executive order is chucked at the people that they never agreed to. Like, it isn't as though the TPP was voted out and then, he was like, of course we won't go. with this agreement. He did an executive order, and the TPP was out. That's all that was required. So all this protesting, all of that was designed to make sure that the people had the narrative very firmly in their minds, so that when he said no, everybody was like, oh, this guy's on our side, when he's very clearly not.
Yeah, and it's God. This it kind of goes back to my one subject, one bill thing. In a way, I mean, if you can't get the idea across in simple, understandable language, I think maybe your idea might be flawed. You know, when it comes to legislating.
Well, or just have consent for everything and embrace anarchy. Because the idea of a government that, you know, even phrases simple things that are also unethical, in the way that they can, would be totally mitigated by an ethical, sort of more educated society, and that's what we have to go for.
Which, well, you know, and that brings us to our school system, which is a complete.
It's an indoctrination system.
A clusterfuck doesn't seem to do it justice. You know,
well,
I mean, it's bad.
How's this sound? I see. Indoctrination and internment camp.
Basically, it is an internment camp. The kids are interned for about 8 hours a day, sometimes more, depending on where you live. And I think a lot of people who have kids didn't count on what it was like to be a parent.
Most of them. Most of them are like irresponsible motherfuckers. They don't care.
I mean, I think some of them think, oh, baby, how cute. And that's as far as their thinking goes, is how cute.
Or like how many benefits going to get for it.
That too. That's a different story, slightly. But then the reality comes up and slaps them in the face when you got the diapers and the clothing. Now we got to get bigger diapers and bigger clothing because it's a year later. We have to get even more clothing because now we have to put them in some sort of an education system, and we have to get a schedule for them. We have to get, you know, they don't think about that when they're doing the hunka chunka.
Of course not. That's because they're doing it for pleasure. I think part of the problem is that everybody's a hedonist and they don't give a shit about like the consequences of their actions, and they've been taught not to. As long as you're following the law, you're a-okay. Even though a lot of the things that you could do outside of the law are massively and hugely irresponsible. And so if you behave irresponsibly and you're told that that's all fine because at least you're a law-abiding citizen, then you will do a lot of irresponsible things.
But yes, that's true. But the point I was getting at is by the time you're 6 to 8 years into being a parent, with all that responsibility and stress heaped upon you 24/7, it's become a break to send the kid off to the internment camp for 8 hours a day.
Yes.
You can either go to work and do your own thing at home or take care of the home, but the kid's out of your hair for a little bit, so it's a relief.
Well,
and that's where the self-interest comes into it.
Yeah, and you know, that's the idea. Like, kids are a burden to these people because they don't actually care about the kids. They care about specifically what the kids can
I'll tell you what
them.
they care about. I'll tell you exactly what they care about. They care about being in a restaurant on a busy night and the food's taken a little longer than expected. They care about having the ability to say, my kids are hungry. That's what they care about. It's these parents who treat their kids like they're fucking leverage.
Or a trophy.
Or a trophy, leverage, a negotiation tactic. Sorry, it doesn't work.
Shouldn't.
Oh, it doesn't on me. I could give two shits, you know. I couldn't. I have no shits to give in those. So once they say something like my kids are hungry, it's like, oh, congratulations for being an irresponsible parent. Feed your fucking kid.
Or like, you know, without government, what about the kids?
Say that again.
Or without government, what about the kids? How would we feed them?
Well, that's always a thing. You know, they always hide behind children, all of them. Chelsea Clinton just did it with that tweet about Barron Trump.
Yeah.
About, you know, bullying kids is wrong. But, fighting bullying includes opposing the president of the United States for bad policies. Bullshit. Fuck you, Chelsea. Let me pull it up, man. I wrote something on that. God damn, that pissed me off. It was just a short little thing. And I can't remember where I write these things anymore. So it's going to take me a minute. But it's just, my point with her was that, look, the Clintons are a dynasty at this point. I think everyone can pretty much agree with that.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is that Bill and Hillary are too old and too unrecoverable from a public relations standpoint to continue that dynasty, to continue that political empire.
Yeah.
So, and we just learned that Hillary's, let's face it, after the pasting she just got, and I don't mean just the election, I mean with the PR, because there was a lot of bad PR rubbed on her face throughout that election or throughout the campaign.
Well, yeah, of course, there's also been like a ton of support and a ton of like dirt on Trump. And that's the idea, is that if you can make her seem like somebody who's like been attacked and been smeared and, all of this to her supporters, in about 8 years, she may be in.
Maybe, but I doubt it.
Well, especially if Trump is like ratcheting
I think
like the control in all these sectors, because they'll need a Democrat, and she's already entrenched.
Yes, but I think that what will happen, and I don't think it'll happen with the next couple of elections, but I think that what we're seeing with Chelsea Clinton is an opening salvo, in a way, into the realm of politics.
Very likely. But keep in mind, though, that if that is the case, it still would be tainted by the Clinton legacy, because
It would.
Hillary is tainted by her husband, and Chelsea will be tainted by her mother and her husband, and people can say this is the Clinton crime family, like they did quite a bit, and whatever support she could get from being new blood may not happen. So the idea is to remember that people are easily distracted and will look off and say, ooh, shiny. And, that it's not necessarily as simple as Hillary did some bad shit and now nobody will support her. Because people will support anyone who they think will serve their personal self-interest. And I think that applies to a lot of people in Hillary's camp. And I think it'll apply to more people the more policies Trump is allowed to enact.
Well, yes, that will happen, but Hillary Clinton will be too old.
Well, Ron Paul ran.
Oh, I know. Yes,
but
I know, and I wish.
Support.
Oh, hell yes, he did. I wish they would have let him into the debates. That would have been fun. I mean, I was there when
the RNC gave him the shaft.
Well, yeah, the RNC always did.
Right.
I was there when Ross Perot was in the debates, but I was young.
Yeah. Wow.
And when he was in the debates, he came to the debates armed with graphs, with visual references, basically.
Yeah.
And it was always a case of, yeah, it was always he was a businessman like Trump, but he always came in with, let me show you this graph, and it became kind of a joke. Saturday Night Live made jokes about it, just like they did with Trump. The media made him out to be a joke. Yeah. But in the end, if you look at what he was actually saying and you look at where we wound up, he was right.
Well, of course.
Ross Perot was absolutely correct.
But being right, that's what I'm saying.
It doesn't matter.
Being right will get you a ton of support from the American people. But so will being well connected and saying this is what you'll get if you vote for me. And that's what Hillary can definitely do no matter what her age is.
Well, yeah, but that's also why I think it will. I think what was more likely to happen is if Hillary's involved at all. I don't think she will be, because I don't think her health is going to hold out.
Maybe.
for the next 4 to 8 years. I don't think that'll happen. And if it turns out that she can't physically do the job, I think what we will see happen is that Chelsea is going to be groomed, and then probably in the next 12 to 16 years, there may be a presidential run. I think in the intervening time, there will be something more senatorial or congressional, because, everyone likes to say that the president has to have experience. Show me that in the Constitution, please. The president just has to be a person of conscience. And that's all the president has to be. Well, yeah, I'm not saying constitutionally, I'm saying realistically. Just has to be a person of conscience. According to the Constitution, they have to be 35 years of age and born in the United States.
Yep.
That's it. I loved it when Elizabeth Warren was going off, and when all of them go off about how Trump never released his taxes. Well, that's not illegal.
Yeah, and
Elizabeth Warren actually made a video and posted it to YouTube and Facebook and all that shit, which I refuted, not in video form, but in a little tiny piece where I looked up her voting record, where she voted against auditing the Fed and things of that nature. Don't come to us about transparency when you have a record being anti-transparency.
Well, right, and also, if tax returns are what you want, first off, what he did release, and when people were very upset with him for dodging taxes in a certain way, Clinton did the same thing with her foundation, and nobody batted an eye in her camp, because they have a vested interest in her looking good, even if it means lying to the people that they're promoting her to.
Yes. But that's just a prediction of mine. I think this is a way to get her into the political fray, and to try to do it on a positive note, but without how do you say this? Without being too flexible toward the other side. Well, I think that's what this little defense of Barron Trump was about with Chelsea Clinton.
Well, it could be that they're trying not to be too flexible to the other side, or it could be that they're showing their business partners that they can play nice.
It could be, because Obama didn't, he didn't do anything to prevent any further charges against her, did he?
No.
So we can still do shit. So yeah, playing nice is a good idea if your last name is Clinton.
Yeah. And not to if you have connections and the idea is to expand your power, and that's why you're taking the presidential seat, then you wouldn't want to do anything but play nice, because you want allies, because you want people who will give you essentially more power once you're out. It's like an investment. You're going in and throwing all of your time and effort at this essentially puppet position / very limited power position, and in the end, you'll come out of it with a huge amount more support for your brand.
Yes.
From somebody, from some people, you'll always end up contempted, but being hated is part of being a public figure.
Being hated is part of being alive.
Yep.
There's no way out of that at all. I'm trying to catch up a little bit on the chat because I was looking up other shit for a minute. Oh, Jesus. Let's see this. The one thing I do like about Trump, and I have to admit we're completely off point here. What I do like about him, and I've said it before, is that he pretty much ruffled feathers on both ends of the political spectrum in this country.
Yep.
And for nothing else, that got my respect, because I've been saying for a long time that what we need in our system is something similar to what you have in the UK, where because in the UK in the Parliament they will just tear each other to shit in a debate or during a meeting. I think the meeting is supposed to be held once a week. If the prime minister isn't there, his immediate subordinate is there.
Well,
And
I would say I wouldn't respect him for it, but I definitely appreciate the aftermath.
yes, well, that's why I respected him for it. I mean, let's face it, the guy's a bit arrogant, and it's fantastic. It's fantastic to see someone who can go in there and not be instantly beholden to someone else.
Well, yeah,
like, no.
Of course, if you look at dramas, that's exactly how they work. Oh, no, he didn't. And so if you start looking at America as more of a reality TV thing where people are glued to one narrative or another, and where shadowy actors in the background can do basically whatever they want, and all they have to do is justify it by making the foreground look appropriate to the aftermath, then, you start to look at people as more actors.
Yes.
Like Trump, of course, he's going to be arrogant. He's the new guy, and Clinton is, the person he's supposed to come in and destroy.
Yes.
And Obama is the person he's supposed to be the opposite of. Even though they're all working with the same people, they've all got the same corporate structures over, the whole world. Those people will constantly have a long stream of "oh no, you didn't" moments.
When we typically when we get a new president, we get I'll use the CIA as an example. In the CIA, when we get a new president, we usually get a new director of the CIA. And that's supposed to make things better. That's supposed to change things, and it doesn't, because the director of the CIA is not the most powerful position within the CIA, because it's not an earned position, it's an appointed position.
Well, right. And like
the real power in the CIA is not the director. It's a guy a couple of floors down from that position, the guy who's earned his position, the guy who's been there for 30 years. That's the guy who's got all the power in the CIA.
Well, yeah, and the idea of the CIA for a long time has been to have as many layers on top of as many layers of control as possible, so that if you try to find one element of it to attack to promote freedom, you won't find any.
Right.
You'll hit dead ends every time. You try and pursue even a journalistic story. There's the story within a story, distractionary tactics.
Yes, that's. Oh, geez, lost my breath there. That's it's actually an old tactic. A lot of the tactics they use are very old.
Yep.
I mean, we've already established they use divide and conquer on a regular basis. Or more like divide and control, I think. But the point stands. And the thing where you distraction is what they're doing, also the CIA specifically, and that's another classic tactic.
Yeah.
But the point I was getting at, I was just using the CIA as an example, is that the appointed positions at the federal level are essentially meaningless. It's the people a step or two down who have been there and earned their position that have all the real power, have all the real knowledge. They understand the true workings of what's going on. Well, those are the people who should be focused on a little bit more, see what they're about.
Well, yeah, and like the idea is, like, don't look at the most obvious choice until last. Always look for the people who may be trying to hide somewhere else in the background. And if you do that, then you'll find that many of the people, quote, in control aren't.
No, they're figureheads. They're there for public relations.
Well, and they're for the veneer of democracy. Like, make it seem like, if you work very hard, someday you can work to protect the country in just the way that we are, when they're not protecting shit except corporate interests.
No, it's like they all have to take that oath about protecting the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. But I can't help but notice that everyone seems to be ignoring the domestic part.
Well, yeah, of course, if you shoot a cop or a federal agent, that's always going to end badly for you.
Right. it doesn't. It doesn't matter if that particular cop or federal agent was acting against the interests of protecting and defending the U.S. Constitution.
And that's why it's
You know?
toothless.
Yes, I would have to agree. The way things are now, it is toothless. I don't know that it should be done away with, though, because I mean, we do need, and I don't mean specifically about what we have now when I say this, but we do need a set of values to point at and be like, this is what we stand for.
Was the Bill of Rights a set of values?
Not officially. Values are a little too subjective, but when they talk about American values, they never point at anything to say what they are. They just throw the phrase out.
Well, yeah, and
if you were to ask, if you'd ask me, the Bill of Rights are the American values. We're supposed to believe in free speech and free religious expression and freedom of assembly and all that good stuff.
Well, the Bill of Rights isn't, to me, the values in and of itself. The Bill of Rights is, if anything, the skeleton that the meat of the values theoretically hangs on. But when those values are no longer even considered or respected by the average person, when, people aren't saying essentially, I will fight for your right to say what you want to say, even if I disagree with it, then they don't actually fundamentally support free speech. They just support speech that isn't regulated by government. If it's regulated by anybody else, then it's fine. And I would say that if you truly respect free speech, you'll respect it when somebody is saying something that you're fundamentally at odds with, and that's not happening. And that's just one thing. Speech, guns. I support the Second Amendment. Right to bear arms. Well, if you support the right to bear arms, but then you tell me how they should be restricted, mentally ill people shouldn't be able to buy guns. We should force them into the underground where they're going to get guns anyway, and they just won't know where the guns are. Fucking terrible ideas.
Yes,
and they don't reflect reason. They don't reflect stability. What they reflect is the idea that people should be able to control other people as long as they're in government.
Right. And I completely disagree with the notion that just having a position in government qualifies anybody to control someone else. It doesn't.
Well, so why should the Bill of Rights be our statement of values? Why? What I like is the non-aggression principle. It's a libertarian principle that says essentially you can't initiate force against somebody. And that seems much more of a value to me than, what the government can't do, which is what the Bill of Rights should be.
I also agree with the non-aggression principle.
Right. But that's a value,
I honestly do. Yes, it is.
That's what we do, not what the government
non-aggression
can't do.
principle is in many ways reflected in the Bill of Rights.
Well, is it? Because the Bill of Rights doesn't say don't aggress. It says aggress, but only once you've filled out the appropriate government paperwork.
Well, yes. But there's also an understanding there that, and I don't like some of the wording, I'll admit. God, am I going to have to pull it up again because no, I have it. Oh, no, I don't. One moment, please. Thank you for holding this. Oh, no, sorry. For example, Amendment 4, the right of people to be secure in their persons' possessions, persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. That sounds like one aspect of the non-aggression principle.
Who decides what's reasonable?
Exactly. That's where it gets sticky. But we see. I agree with the non-aggression principle, but there's a part of me that says, "But you know what people are like."
Well, absolutely, but that's why it's about initiating force. If people are like something other than the non-aggression principle, you can be violent toward them.
See when it says against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, what's reasonable becomes, for example, when someone initiates force against you, it becomes reasonable for them to be searched and things to be seized that were related to that violation of the non-aggression principle. If you understand what I'm saying.
Well, okay.
Doesn't
Do
it?
you have the right to do that, or does the government have the right? Because the Bill of Rights is about negative rights. It's about what the government can't do. It's not about what you can do. So the
Right,
non-aggression
exactly.
principle has like some sort of impetus of an immediate like response possibility. And that, I think, is a much better deterrent than saying, well, the government can't do this. Well, so what? If you're waiting for the government to come and solve your problems, a lot of places you have 2 hours at least before they even get there, ask a few questions because they're irritated about a long day, and then leave.
Okay.
So, like,
In that case, I actually do have a response for that, and that's the Second Amendment.
well, right. So why don't we just say the
there's a
non-aggression
specific-
principle and, like, not the Bill of Rights?
I don't know.
Especially since the Bill of
something like
Rights, especially since the Bill of Rights has been curbed so significantly. I mean, we're talking about a piece of paper that people find new and better ways to infringe upon every single day. The Second Amendment might as well be toilet paper, because what we got is so many guns that are illegal, so many ways to use them that are illegal, that basically self-defense has to come from the government or you die.
At the hands of the government often.
Yeah.
But I'll admit I'm talking about I am talking about a hypothetical idealized situation too.
Well, right. So how do we build that
That I talked
idealized
about.
situation? Well, we're only restrained by the idea of that piece of paper, which has shown itself to be ineffective in doing so.
Well, the paper has shown itself to be ineffective, but that's because of people.
So are the people ineffective? Why should we have the paper?
Well, if the people aren't effective, then the paper's worthless.
Isn't the paper worthless then? Don't the people need to be worth something? Wouldn't it be much better to just say, defend your property and defend the property of those who you think deserve it, and, forego the government situation here? Why do they need to be involved?
If it were me, I would take every measure I could to keep the government out of it.
Well, there you go.
If the situation happened, if I thought I could get away with killing an intruder who entered my home in the dead of night with intentions that I am completely unclear on, but by God, if I'm going to let him follow through, if I put two in his head and I can dispose of the body in such a way and dispose of any trace of them, any evidence, I'm going to do that first.
Well, there you go, though. Why is that unethical?
I think it is ethical.
Well, so why shouldn't you be able to do it? Is the Bill of Rights worth defending?
According to the Second Amendment, I can't do that.
Well, not according to many people's interpretation of the Second Amendment, and that's where you come up.
Their interpretation is irrelevant. Words mean things. I mean, we have this whole system of language to communicate these ideas, and
then
words give us the ability to be very specific about that.
And then a government that can't be stopped by them.
If you really look at the Second Amendment, the part that everyone seems to overlook on the pro and anti-gun side of the issue, as if it applies only to guns, and it doesn't. The part everyone seems to overlook is the phrase, the security of a free state. The key word there being free. And honestly, if you want to boil down everything that threatens the security of a free state, it can be boiled down to one word: tyranny. And tyranny doesn't exist solely from the point of view of a government on a person or a group of people on a person. It can exist person to person. When someone steals from you, that's an act of tyranny. When someone invades your home, that's an act of tyranny.
Absolutely. But that's philosophy, and in the end, philosophy can't be a basis for law, at least not government law. I mean, if we're talking actual law like Bastiat law, then a law is created whenever two people agree to something, and somebody who breaks that law is fundamentally just an aggressor. But if we're talking government law, those laws will always benefit the corporations. Those laws will always benefit them, and they always have. Even back to the time when the Constitution was written, like a little bit after that, the Whiskey Rebellion happened. Those people weren't secure in their persons, papers, and effects.
Nope. The
So it's
Japanese in
never been.
1942 certainly weren't.
Neither were the people who had their gold and their silver raided when the government basically wanted to chuck every piece of precious metal at metals at the foreign powers that it invested in the wars. You know, like there are a ton of problems, none of which can be solved by the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights can only be there for somebody to say, you told us you wouldn't do this, and now you're doing it. The problems are still there, even if you can say that to somebody. And even then, the judge has to interpret it exactly that way. There have been plenty of constitutional law things that have been overturned later.
Let's look at it from a different point of view then. What about, like you had said, according to I forget what word you said. It was a certain type of law just now.
Bastiat law?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
Where the only law that really exists is when two people form a contract.
Two or more, yeah.
Okay. Oh, minimum of two, let's say.
Yeah.
Okay. In that context, wouldn't the Bill of Rights, I mean, if we change the way we think about it, obviously this would have to happen first. If we started to examine it as a contract between a government and a people.
I didn't sign it.
Between the government and the governed. Well, see, that's actually a problem I have too, is that how do you make this contract valid from one generation to another?
You can't. Really as soon as the baby's born, another human life is there that never agreed to the society it's in. And then you have to, give that person the ability to opt out of society. And essentially, that's where we get into a lot of the interesting elements of an anarchist society. Like, how do you even do that generation to generation? But realistically, even the ones here, they had nothing to do with signing that. And if a child can't sign a contract anyway, then when they learned the Pledge of Allegiance by rote and they said it every morning, that didn't mean shit. Not unless a child can also, not unless a child can also, like, fuck without the person who did it being called a pedophile. If we're going to say a child has no legal understanding and no understanding of what goes into a contract, then they can't pledge allegiance when they're 5 or 6. They can't do it until they understand it totally. And that means most of us never pledged allegiance. We've just been saying it over and over. I don't say it anymore.
No, we've just been chanting unconsciously.
Right, and it's the same thing with the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and all this. They're all just old documents written by dead people that have no bearing ethically on our, existence. Not ethically.
I forgot what I was going to say. God damn it. I love getting old. This is what I get for letting it go for more than an hour, I suppose.
You just need an energy drink.
I've got coffee. It's way better than energy drinks for me anyway. We looked at the Bill of Rights as a contract is what I was getting at. But then I defeated my own argument by pointing out the generational thing. Oh, I remember now. And it kind of goes back to the whole contract argument or that whole contract idea. One of the problems I have when it comes to some of the arbitrary limits we place on children, because if we're going to play the game where we go by the word of the Bill of Rights, and if we go by word, it never says except for black people. It never says except for women. It never says except for gays. It never says except for people who can barely find their dicks yet. It doesn't say except for people still in diapers.
Well, it doesn't say any of that, but it's also connected and attached to a document that is. So,
actually, I think I don't remember a whole lot of places in the Constitution where age limits are implied.
Well, landowning
or even are specified. What's that?
Well, landowning certainly is.
I know that voting was the.
I think they had like a section where like they defined what the Constitution applies to.
But what I'm getting at is the concept of informed consent, because you brought up the law existing between two or more people in the form of a contract, and you can't have a contract without informed consent.
Right.
Well, honestly, if there's a 16-year-old couple who are doing the nasty, What right do I have to come in and say that they're not informed? I mean, what do I do? I stop them in the middle? Do I present them with a quiz? What's the etiquette? Or do I have to just sort of take it on faith that they might know what they're doing, and if they don't know what they're doing, they're certainly going to find out.
Well, how do you know they're 16?
Well, that's just for the scenario purposes, for the hypothetical.
Well, right, but in this hypothetical scenario, you have that knowledge, and I'm guessing you know them in some way.
Okay, sure. Let's go with that. That would make sense.
So if you know them in some way, then you can know whether they're being responsible or whether they're, going to create burdens on society. Because basically, that's what these.
Well, I can assume. I can't know for certain because I'm certainly not going to sit there and bust out like the protractor and the magnifying glass to find out who's wearing what. Or I'm not taking a blood test to see what's in whose system.
Well, absolutely. But you wouldn't do that with somebody who's older than that.
Right. That's what I mean.
Well,
so again, I have to kind of, as a third party, sort of accidentally stepping into that situation where I witnessed this thing, I kind of have to take it on faith that I either have to take it on faith that they know what they're doing or take it on faith that they don't.
Well, but here's this is the same as any other situation you'd step into. You know certain things about it, and you know certain things about the rest of the world. And if you know enough about both, then you can make a judgment there. If you don't, then the only thing you're doing is making essentially a blanket statement that probably won't logically apply, or has a 50-50 chance of logically applying, which isn't much better than probably won't. So,
right.
It's the same as any other situation.
That's what I'm getting at, really, is that it's a situation where, as a third party not involved in the contract, at what point, like you said, maybe I know these two particular people and I can make some judgments based on that, but
like, it's sort of like somebody voting, based on gun rights or abortion rights. They clearly aren't informed about the rest of the things that this vote means. So are you allowed to stop them from voting? If somebody doesn't know what's in their food, are you allowed to stop them from consuming it? And I wouldn't say so. I would say informed consent is a problem that would come up when it's not something that's caveat emptor. Informed consent seems to be like, making property exchanges on food. Something.
Isn't informed consent like the basis for having labels on food?
It's the basis, but I don't support that idea either, because essentially the government gets to decide what gets labeled and what doesn't. Natural flavors, fucking name me the 40,000 little molecules that are in my M&M.
Yeah, I don't buy the natural flavors thing because it's too vague.
Or artificial flavors. I mean, a lot of those are probably natural sources.
Well, everything's natural.
Right.
Everything is natural. Everything comes from nature.
And everything comes from the product of something from nature, like fundamentally.
And it's just not always good food,
Right. So if they don't like it, I'm pretty sure they can stop in any of these cases.
Well, yeah, I mean, and there again, I'd say the market could take care of it, because when they find out that red dye number 16 is causing everyone to bleed from the crotch, they're going to probably, and their profits go down because of it. Red dye number 16 is probably going to disappear from that set of ingredients for that particular product.
Right.
That's
the idea. Like, on a more individual level, we would get consent contracts. You would get essentially the idea that if you said something like in a recording, it would cover you in court, or and something like that. If these people want to do that and be completely ethically covered on both sides, then they would have to have some sort of recording where they said, yeah, I'm really into this guy or some shit, because otherwise there's going to be somebody claiming rape or whatever. It's very complicated when you get into like subjective ideas.
That actually happens now with the little shadow courts they have running around the college campuses.
Well, right.
Because there were the cases where the where it actually ties into my scenario pretty well. That was a third party. The two people, the guy and the gal hooked up. Okay, and they bumped uglies. And I'm assuming that it was the gal's friend who made the college aware that these two people had been feeding the cat. I'm going to try to work every euphemism I can in here.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the motivation of that third party who was not involved in that contract between those two people, and even the girl involved in the act? When it came up to when they questioned her, she's like, "No, I was a willing participant." Basically, it's like,
Yeah.
no, that's something I wanted to do too. It wasn't, but the guy still got blackballed and marked as a rapist.
Well,
Because
and of course, like the guy got blackballed.
Yeah, exactly. And it's because this third person who wasn't involved in any way had to be a moral busybody and achieve a political agenda.
Right.
Well, this is why I don't like shit that operates in the shadows.
Well, and the idea should be then to find out like specifically who and what consented to what, because like that's another idea when you start to make like blanket statements on who can and can't consent, and stop being like case by case basis, and realizing like.
I've always advocated for a case-by-case basis because of my sense of individuality and individual liberty.
Well, right. So that case-by-case basis would be in all interactions, and
yes.
like then you get like you can't be racist to white people, you can't rape a man, child support almost always goes to the mother, that sort of thing. Like you get giant scams, and that's the problem.
Yes, and I've always said that the only way to ensure the rights of a specific group is to ensure the rights of all individuals.
Well, right.
That is the only absolute way to do that.
And that's where you get to the contract consent level. This one was never signed by anybody alive. I guarantee you, like unless they were being smarmy, they didn't sign the Constitution. They didn't sign the Bill of Rights. We're still operating on other people's signatures. Lots and lots of dead people. Nobody alive signed this thing, and yet it's still something that we're all bound to. Why? What other contract has that as its rule?
States' constitutions.
Well, right. Yeah.
Hey, I had to come up with something.
Like Hawaii or something?
Oh, yeah.
Like those ones, the newest ones, there might actually be living people who had their signature on that, but still not most of the people in Hawaii or whatever.
Hawaii became part of the Union, I think, in 1959.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there could still be a signatory kicking around.
And and if they are, and you bring up to them that their signature wasn't valid because everybody didn't agree to it, they're going to say your contract was implicit because you live here. You can always move to like California or something, sort of like anarchists are constantly told to move to Somalia. You
can't move to anywhere else because there's still no contract under this.
And the government is everywhere.
The government is what?
And the government is everywhere.
Yes, a government is everywhere.
Well, I say the government because I think the global government system is pretty much one, like already.
And if it's not, there's certainly enough mutual crotch scratching going on that it might as well be.
Right. Yeah, and that's the idea. If you really want a good society, you've got to scrap the bad ideas from the old one. And part of the ideas that I would say are bad is the idea that people can make a contract incumbent on future generations. The Bill of Rights is one of them. I mean, if government is ethical, why should it be barred from doing whatever as long as those actions are ethical? Well, maybe because some of these actions aren't ethical and they said, well, see, we didn't do this, even though we did this, we didn't do this, and in this specific interpreted way, and that's when you start getting into really shaky ethical territory.
Well, yeah, it's almost like the more you examine the idea, especially when it comes to something like the Bill of Rights, for example, the more you examine the idea, it's like the greater the likelihood you're going to start looking for a workaround.
Yeah. Well, I can't do this,
So,
but can I do this?
it's like I can't do this, but I can do this if I do it this way.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. There's no rule that someone's not going to figure out how to circumvent.
And that's why government law is all written in legalese, because that way they can just, chuck whatever ethics they want out the window as long as they're following the letter of previous law.
Now, here's what I want to know. Could you support the Bill of Rights if it were upheld at the government level?
I would support the things in it. I wouldn't support the bill. Sort of like I could support not letting a house burn down, but I'm not necessarily crazy about taxpayer-funded firefighters.
Okay. Well, I can't see. I've never seen anything in the Constitution about that. It might exist at the state level because it would fall under the 10th.
And the idea is that if you want firefighters, you'll probably find somebody that will be willing to fight fires. It's not a hard position to fill, because when you're a very young child, one of the first things people say is, I want to help people, because they've been helped and they've been taught helping is good, but only by the altruistic sort of government fakery. So at the very least, during this society, you could probably find a decent grip of kids that say, I want to grow up to be firefighters. And then, fast forward 20, 30 years, you could probably find a decent grip of those kids that are now adults and firefighters. And then those people, if they transition to a free society, an anarchist society, would probably still want to be firefighters, sort of like the other people would still want to pave roads and shit. And so you end up with a lot of people who had a job, were good at a job, and then their job transitioned to other holders, to another basically holding company. The people, the average person gets to decide which service they patronize. And that's probably not going to stop. None of it is probably going to stop, except that which is inefficient and unethical. And to me, that means that if doing away with the Bill of Rights, even though I used to cherish the concepts in it, is one of the steps involved, that's what I'll do.
Now, do you suppose that what do you think is the chain of events? As far, do you think that we'll ever get out of the pendulum swinging from more tyranny to less tyranny, more control to less control? It'd be another way to say it.
Well, I don't think
that we'll eventually get out of that cycle and into something that is more like a anarcho-capitalist system.
Well, see, if you think of it as like a pendulum of like more freedom, less freedom in general, then you would definitely have like no possibility of getting out of that, really, because there will be states of greater or lesser freedom. The idea of an anarchist society has the possibility to swing back. But if you start to think of the pendulum as Republican Democrat or atheist or religious or whatever these other like paradigms that have existed, then essentially you can say all you need to do is break into the occasional sector of that society and do it better. And then people will want to gravitate toward that. So, yeah, sure, maybe somewhere down the line, government will be, the popular choice, and people like, anarchists ruined everything. There ought to be fucking 40,000 laws again, which, is sort of doubtful, maybe. But if that happens, at least the mechanisms for an anarchist society would already exist. at least in the public mythos. The only way to get rid of them at that point would be to destroy all data centers, which it's possible. But reasonably speaking, this is our time to test it. It's not our time to know what's going to happen. An anarchist society's never really been tried. Not in any major sense, and certainly not with the amount of communication that we have, the resources, the technology, all of that. It's never been attempted. But now is our time to test it and scientifically meet out all of the variables. And if we can do that, the pendulum can at least swing for a very long time in one direction. And then if government does come in, which is basically a gang of thieves writ large, as Murray Rothbard would put it, then people can say, hey, these are all fucking examples of how it was better without them. And so we should probably switch back, just maybe not do what we were doing that people were upset about. That is the power of human communication. It doesn't need to be fine and exactly perfect the first time. It can be fine and decent later on down the line. And that's what we have to go for. We don't get perfect right off. We don't get perfect with government. There's no point to...
There's no perfect.
Yeah, there's no point to trying for a perfect society and saying, like, if we don't get that, then we're better off with government, because government is massively imperfect, and like there's a huge amount of imperfections in government. And if you point them all out, it becomes overwhelmingly true that you would be better off without them. And that's where I think a lot of people need to get, to realize that they're better off without them.
Where could geopolitically speaking, where could someone go to set up such an experiment?
Liberland. I mean, Liberland has a very small government, and all you'd have to do after moving to Liberland and setting up a successful enterprise is have Liberland expand into surrounding territories and reduce government to zero eventually. I do think it's a decent experiment. I think it's going to fail because I think it's starting out with the government and not decentralized. But, there's also the idea that, like, if you don't want to do a Liberland sort of thing, if you don't want to move to a place with a government, but just essentially a smaller one, you could start the decentralization process in your own hometown. Take a government service and do it yourself. The military, the roads, education, fucking plumbing. Anything. And when you start to do that, when you start to decentralize, people will gravitate toward decentralization if you do it well. So it's a huge burden and it's a huge risk, but it has huge benefits and payoffs if it works. And that sort of thing will drive investors toward that sort of idea, whether they're investors of money or human capital, whether they're investors of Federal Reserve notes or their own time and energy. People will say, maybe this would be better. And as long as people can then violently defend themselves from people who would violently attack them, that's the way forward in my view. I wouldn't say start with a minimal society, and I wouldn't try to say try to work to a minimal society. I would say try to eliminate government in enough areas that a minimal society is a distant cousin to the society you can come out with.
So where is this Liberland?
It's near Sweden, I think.
Okay. I've never heard of it.
Okay, well, you should check out Liberland. You should also check out the small sort of subset anarchist societies that are popped up throughout history. And you should also check into the idea of decentralization and localization, because those are all the things that could make an anarchist society work. And, let us free ourselves from the shackles of these old dead people.
No, what I wonder is, would it be possible to, the only way to fund it, I think, would have to start with some sort of crowdfunding, because no government is. What's that?
And cryptocurrency.
Yes, because no government is going to say, hey, yeah, let's set aside this large patch of land for these people to try this thing for a generation or two. It's never going to happen, because that means they would lose control. And and they also wouldn't lose control because they'd be the people allowing it, which means that they could take it away at any time.
Like they did with, Ruby Ridge, Waco, fucking the BLM thingy.
So I wonder, what if somewhere out in international waters, for example, there was a large enough oil rig where an anarcho-capitalist society could be implanted, and obviously the resources supplied through cryptocurrency or crowdfunding, like we've discussed. If we could be set up to have a good starting point, and from there on, it was just it was up to the people living there to sustain it.
Well, that
I
would
don't
be
think there's
fine as long as there wasn't like some huge government intervention. That's the point. It's not just about
Yeah.
being there and sustaining. It's a matter of being there and saying you can't come and take it. Molan
Right.
Labe is fine if you are fine with defending yourself. Don't tread on me is fine as long as you aren't going to tread on anyone else, so that the U.S. government doesn't come in and say, "Hey, we need to be involved here." The idea isn't just self-sufficiency. The idea is sufficiency of, interpersonal defense, so that you can protect your society from these, this gang that's long entrenched
Honestly,
in human society.
the way such a thing, presuming there was a large enough oil platform that's now defunct to do this on, where you could import soil and all the stuff you need to grow food, to have an infrastructure, yada, 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 including internet. The only problem is the internet, or government spies, I suppose, from assorted governments. But once you get something like the internet involved, because I mean, the whole point of a project like that would be to let people know the outcome. And the only way to keep people updated on a regular basis would be something like the internet.
Well, right.
Sure,
That's why
you could phone in a couple of reports every month, but that's just not going to have the same effect as everyone being able to go to a website and say, "Hell, here, look, they've finally got their solar panels working at whatever efficiency," or they were able to find an untapped reserve of oil that they're using for energy or whatever.
Well, and all of that is a valuable thing to consider, but
what I'm saying is, once let's say we were part of some society like that, and we were updating, on blog posts and whatnot, how things are going, and they turned out to be going really well, someone would come in and decide to shut it down.
Well, yes,
is what I'm getting at.
But that's the idea of decentralization everywhere, because
yes.
Because the idea should be like, yeah, sure, have a few of those places, but have them be, examples that are concurrent with other examples. Decentralization Weekly comes out, and like there are 14 more businesses that are doing what the government did. There are 20 more people signing up to work with this one business that decided, or collective even, that decided to do something ethical that society would benefit from, but that the state is trying to stop them from. Things like that. And that sort of like general migration toward decentralization will have pushback. But if it's done in as many places as possible, then the government will have a hard time regulating everywhere.
Well, how do you get started in your own town? I mean, it's one thing to say. Pardon me.
The lawnmower brigade.
Did you say lumbar brigade?
Lawnmower brigade. The thing you brought up earlier.
Okay.
The Vipers.
Basically,
neighborhood watch.
Sort of working within the system to eliminate the system, I guess.
Creating your own systems so that the other systems are obsolete.
Yeah. Okay. That's the nicer way to phrase it, but I think the end goal is pretty much the same.
Oh yeah.
I mean, because we've addressed the shadowy nature of government dealings, the seemingly obsessive need to control people. But really what it comes down to is corruption and self-interest.
Well, yes.
And I think under almost any system, it's going to be that's going to be one of those things where it's like where vigilance is going to be required at all times.
Well, yes, but vigilance is required now. The reason there's so much corruption and terribility is because vigilance isn't being
Exercise.
implemented. Yeah,
Right. I'd agree. I mean,
and
and how do you get it's a weird idea to get people who are not vigilant about such things to start behaving in that vigilant manner. I mean, we do it by doing this. This is one way we do it. I mean, I also do it by when I go to a store and someone says to me, have a nice day, I still have that part in me that says, don't tell me what to do. And it's kind of a joke, sure, but it's within us. It's a question of how do you access it in a constructive way.
well, right, but like the idea is that government is essentially a giant crutch. If people decided
Yes.
that they wanted to do these things on their own, they would do it. And so the idea of having a government there in the first place is like saying, don't worry, we have you covered. And if that's the general idea, then they can get away with a host of bullshit, because essentially without them, we'd be fucked, according to a lot of people. But in reality, government has equipped people to equip themselves not at all. And that's the problem. It's like it's saying essentially that it doesn't matter what you do, we have you covered, and without us, nobody would have you covered. Not without us, maybe be self-sufficient, but without us, nobody would have you covered, and that's a huge problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the first steps to take, I think, is to point out the option.
Yeah,
Point out the option of that disconnected. That's not the word you used. Decentralized.
Yeah.
Point out the option of decentralization, but pointing out the option, I don't think I think that's the first half step.
Yes. It's not the society at all yet. Absolutely.
No, I mean, it has to be included with the rest of the step would have to be kind of showing how it works better.
Right.
I mean, you have to have something to show.
And that's why I like real world examples like Vipers. Like,
Yes.
because they're doing what we should be doing. All of us.
Well, yeah. I mean, I always wondered, if I had the money to set up an independent police force, I assume there would have to be some sort of a roving unit. There'd have to be some sort of a uniform to make everyone easily identifiable. And I've always wondered what I would do to separate my guys from the government guys. And all I could think of really was to have a red uniform. Well, for one thing, it'd stand out better. And I think if people like that are more easily identified, there's less. I think there's less. What are they up to? Why are they wearing dark colors? When a cop stops you in the dead of night for going on a bike ride or whatever you have to do, maybe you need to burn off some energy to get to sleep. No, it's why are you dressed in dark colors? Why are you?
Well,
you're dressed in dark colors too. Don't come at me with dark colors. I wear what I want.
Well, right. Like, the idea though is like if they do need something where they need to be less seen, like if they see something happen, moving into an environment where there are maybe hostiles saying, "Here, look at me," maybe not the best idea. So they change the uniform during their patrol?
No. See, that's where you have your that's where I would have the special units. Actually, I would have like your average everyday roving type unit would be the guys in the red uniform.
So surveillance.
Well, they'd just be roving around. They'd be doing the patrols. Do you know anything about executive level security?
Not much.
Stuff like Secret Service. I don't mean the agency itself. I mean, but how they do their thing. There's always at least two levels of protection going on. There's what people can see and what people can't see.
Yeah.
So, these guys in the red uniforms, these are the guys you can see. These are the they're like the face of the company, if you will.
The plainclothes.
But I would have no, they're not plainclothes. These are actually uniforms. It's but when you get into like a situation where you have a standoff, that kind of a situation where say someone's in their house with their kids and they're threatening to kill the kids.
Yeah.
That's when you bring in the other unit. The level that people usually don't see, which would be the equivalent, I guess, to SWAT teams.
Well, that's reasonable. And it also prevents the beat cops from being like immediately corrupt, especially if you disarm the people on patrol or put their weapons in the trunk or something where they couldn't just access them on their belt.
Right. Because I don't think I would have the people roving around be armed necessarily.
Well, the way Vipers does it is they just have really good policies with weapons and violence use. Like their force use. Their ideas like essentially don't shoot first. Try to diffuse situations whenever possible, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Exactly. And but I would while the SWAT guys under the system I'm thinking about, and I admit I'm like spitballing this thing because I'm trying to, because you got me thinking about it. So I'm trying to figure out some angles that would be workable under such a system. I think that while the SWAT guys would be in part, they would be, damn it, they would be paid to train. Some of their time each day would be devoted to training. But, because they're the SWAT guys and they have to be ready at a moment's notice in case something really bad does go down, they would also be the guys at the, let's call it a police station for lack of a better phrase, or Central. They'd be at Central all day too, with the training facility, and they'd probably be handling a bunch of the incoming calls, some of the bookkeeping kind of stuff.
Right.
But, because you got to be cost effective in such a system too.
Yeah.
So how do you address that? I mean, sure, everyone's got to come back from their patrols and fill out their reports if necessary. But, you got to have office type people, and it might be cost effective to have the office people be that SWAT team. So at any moment they can drop the shit, go to a skeleton crew in the office, and they're out in the neat van or the MRAP or whatever they need to go handle a genuine situation. Not like now when you call out a SWAT team. What's that?
Which rarely arises.
Yeah, it actually does rarely arise. I mean, violent crime is going down still.
Yeah, and the violent crime that still exists is still mostly due to government laws. So, if those laws reduce because we're decentralizing and people are like, we don't need these motherfuckers, then, for instance, the drug laws would reduce and there would be less violence in inner cities. The prostitution laws would reduce and there would be less violence on the suburbs. And because this criminal element encourages its fellow criminal element. It's something I went over on Fenrir's show when I was there, but he didn't totally agree with me. So, but that's for another subject, another time.
Well, yeah, but there's some valid points there too. Is that under such a system, a lot of stuff would be decriminalized.
Yeah.
And therefore the necessity for, a highly trained SWAT team to handle a jaywalking violation goes way, way down.
And especially since jaywalking wouldn't be against the law, the idea of jaywalking was there to protect corporate interest in the form of saying, yes, drive your cars at whatever speed, wherever, we've got you covered in case somebody decides to walk in front of you.
Yeah. But that's what I'm getting at is it's, where the fuck me. where it stands now, we're calling out SWAT teams to handle the mundane.
Right. And we're arming the normal cop and telling the normal cop that he should act like a SWAT team, like the Radley Balco Rise of the
Yes.
Warrior Cop kind of paradigm.
Yeah, and it's absolutely unnecessary.
Yeah.
It's the you attract more flies with honey than vinegar.
It's not unnecessary to their current goals. It'd be unnecessary to keeping us safe, that's for sure. But their current goals aren't to keep us safe, and I don't think they ever will be.
No, when you're lobbing a flashbang into a baby's crib just to make a minor drug bust,
or shooting a war veteran's dog on no warrant, on no barely any suspicion, and and then blaming him for trying to interfere with that. Don't.
Oh yeah, no matter what, they're going to hit you with obstruction of justice or interfering with an investigation,
justice,
all that shit. So-called justice.
Yeah.
That's the other thing is people don't know what justice is.
People don't care what justice is. They just care what they can get away with. It's the laziness I was talking about.
Yeah. I mean, it really is. There's a lot of intellectual laziness going on.
And physical laziness. I mean, a lack of a governance society, you would have to do things instead of like putting it off on the future generations by spending in debt.
Well, yeah, I don't want to go into it because it makes me angry, but I once wrote a constitutional amendment about revamping our current tax system into something manageable and good for the country. And it would actually motivate our legislators to make deals, our legislators and negotiators to write laws and make deals that are pro-American business. And I accidentally deleted it. So it makes me, I'm pissed about that. It was worded beautifully. It was worded simply. And it got down to, it was like half a page long. And I had it down to the level of licensing and things like that, where even licensing couldn't be prohibitive in its cost structure.
Right. Well,
but the thing is, it was simple and easy to follow, and only took up half a page. But if you get a legislator or a bureaucrat or anyone in government to write something similar, there's going to be all kinds of loopholes. Mind you, I did like a 10% tax rate, did away with the IRS, did away with the tax return. Their next year's budget is based on this year's tax revenue at 10% rate for every legal entity. I did it something like that. I wish I still had it because the wording was beautiful.
Well, okay.
It was almost artistic.
And that may be like a really good idea in this society. Like, I won't deny that. But like,
oh, I know it totally goes against what we're talking about.
Right. If you want a better society, you have to realize like the root of the problem. And part of the root of the problem here is that the reason licensure costs are so high, and there's such a variety of licenses and fees associated with things, is that you have
certification.
Is that you have giant inefficient bureaucracies that are designed to pay everybody in them for the illusion of job creation, or for the illusion of government needs to be this big, because obviously if we weren't taxing you this much, we wouldn't be able to fund all these jobs. And if there weren't all these jobs, we wouldn't be able to protect you. And if we wouldn't be able to protect you, you wouldn't be able to make that money. Yeah.
You wouldn't be able to make the money that we're going to tax. It's a circle jerk.
Yes. And that's what we have to do. We have to break the cycle.
Then there was a anti-drug commercial from years ago. I think it was in the 80s, late 80s maybe, where a guy was walking in a circle. One of these, he was like a Wall Street type. And he just kept saying this one thing over and over, and it was completely circular logic, and it was beautifully done for an ad campaign. He just kept saying, I use cocaine so I can work longer hours, so I can make more money, so I can buy more cocaine.
Yep.
And he just kept going around in that circle. And that's what government does.
And then people are like, well, people aren't good. That's why we need a government.
No,
Well,
that's not true.
people are bad, so we need a government made up of people to govern the people, which are bad. I mean, so what? Are we just saying that they're like this angelic class of people that will never do anything wrong? No.
And we put them in government. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a load of shit.
Yeah, and
It's
I'm a
broken
cynical
thinking.
pessimist. I won't see
Oh,
anything there.
no, I won't either. I'm actually very cynical and very pessimistic because the optimist is always disappointed.
Yep.
And I got tired of being disappointed. Since becoming a pessimist, I've in general been far more happy.
Yeah, same. Cynicism
You
has
know,
been the only thing that's brought me joy because I've realized, that these fundamental errors in society are broadly ignored. So if we start to tackle them and if we start to realize they exist so that we can tackle them, which requires a certain measure of cynicism and pessimism, then I can actually do something. Because the reason I was upset a lot of the time is a feeling of powerlessness. And that's
yes.
what I can edit with like a better attitude that's like more negative.
I'll tell you what, man, I was out of work for a couple of years one time, and it was depressing as all hell. So I, not being a person of great financial means, there wasn't much I could do, but I did what I could do. In that time, I learned how to oil paint landscapes. And it sounds frivolous, I know, but
No.
it wasn't just about oil painting. It's about improving yourself. It's about improving your mind. No matter what your circumstances, you can always do that. I went out and taught myself how to do a little bit of gardening.
Right.
Growing my own food. And I actually came up with a system to create nutrient-rich water to water my garden with. And my God, basil leaves were the size of my hand.
Yeah.
I mean, it's even when you're at the very lowest point, you can do shit to improve yourself. And if you can do shit to improve yourself, that makes you a commodity. And if you're a commodity, you're going to get a job.
And if you're also willing to like take the steps to get the power back in your hands. Because that's
Yes.
like a lot of the reason government exists is because like some government worker told some disenfranchised person that we can improve your life, and then when their life started to seem like it was improving, even though they didn't look into anything surrounding it, because of course they're desperate and disenfranchised, they said, that's it. I need a government. Everybody else does too. They threw up their hands at whatever revolution they had. And that's why government really likes to make it hard on the inner city, because the more you can pack people in, the more you can keep them under your thumb, the more they'll turn to you when things start to go wrong, because you're the only image of structure in that environment.
Well, not only that, but to use my own example again, in the inner city, where are you gonna find a spot where you can teach yourself through trial and error how to do something like growing your own vegetables? Sure, there are little spots, but someone's going to trample them. There are people who will destroy your work just to destroy your work. They do
Out
exist.
of spite.
They're not. Yeah. Just because you're doing something that they can't, or that they won't allow themselves to do, really.
Well, and that's the real thing. Like, people are never spiteful because they like can't do the thing. They're spiteful because they're not doing it, and you are. They can. They just won't put in the work, and they're jealous and disgusted with somebody who is putting in the work.
Which means they're really jealous and disgusted with themselves.
Yes, and that's the non-lazy way of thinking. Like, when you finally realize that the problem with a lot of the things in your life lies within.
Well, yeah, it's people don't realize. I don't know how this has it has somehow it has something to do with what we're talking about, because it seems like we strayed, but I don't think we really have. But people don't realize that whether or not they're happy isn't up to anyone but them.
Yeah,
it's almost a conscious decision you make on a daily basis.
Well, it is a conscious decision, and it's like it's just mostly a matter of what you're willing to trade your happiness or unhappiness for. Like, he hit me, so now I'm pissed. Well, okay, you can be pissed that he hit you, or you can hit back and smile, or you can say, like, I received a great order at the food service establishment I went to today, and I'm going to enjoy this and be happy. Well, you're trading that food for your happiness. You're trading a lot of things for however you feel about them. And that's like the fundamental thing that I think a lot of people don't understand. It's like everything is a cost benefit analysis, and you're going to end up eventually either on top or on bottom, and it's your choice for the most part.
For the most part, it is. Yeah, there are. I don't care who it is. I don't care if they're. We each have that dream. Okay, who cares what the dream is? We each have one. We want. There's something that we want. We're willing to work for it. It's the thing that we're gonna get if we're left alone to do so. But there are two kinds of people out there: the people who are gonna tell you you can do it, and the people who are gonna tell you you can't. I say don't listen to either of them.
Yeah.
I say, screw everyone, go do your thing. And that kind of does tie into the anarcho-capitalism thing, I think, because it's really about self-determinism.
Yes, and that's sort of a Randian thing too, which a lot of the Randians are like pro-government because essentially Ayn Rand said you can't operate a society without one, using a lot of the same tropes that a lot of the same statists do, which is unfortunate because she had a huge potential to be like completely individualist and she blew it, in my opinion. But you end up with like. With a really good mindset, if you say, yeah, this works for me, this doesn't, so I'll do this and not that. And when you finally start to retool your life and find out really where things are, that's when you're in control. But the government would rather you just turn to them in all cases.
Yeah. Well, they want you to give up on yourself.
Yeah,
they
because
want
then
you to
you'll
make
rely
that
on
conscious decision. They don't just want you to give up on yourself. They want you to. That's how they defeat you. They want you to defeat yourself.
Yeah.
So you have to rely on them, like you said. And
or just not even defeat yourself. Just start defeating each other so that there are enough weak and broken people in society that they can manipulate them more easily.
Well, and that's why I say don't listen to the people who tell you you can't, and don't listen to the people who tell you you can. The people
because
who tell
they
you
might
you can't
both have like some sort of ulterior motive.
Not even that. It's just the people who, it's simpler than that, I think. The people who tell you you can't don't want you to, obviously. They don't want you to elevate beyond them. The people who tell you you can, they're better. They want you to elevate, but they're also the ones who are going to give you that false sense of security.
Yeah.
And, like if you watch any of the old VH1 Behind the Music things, a lot of times you'll hear a lot of the people in the band say, I believed my own press. And that's kind of what you have to watch out for. And I understand it. I mean, a lot of those people were getting into that world when they were like in their early mid-20s. So they didn't have like, what's that?
They felt invincible.
That, but they also hadn't lived enough of real life. Real life is a subjective term, but they didn't live enough of life to build up certain defenses yet. So they went into a thing being unprepared for it.
And of course, they were coddled by the way society has been structured for a really long time.
Well, yeah, the second you got a hit song, you're the smoothest thing since chopped carrots or something. I don't know what the expression is, but
Like butter.
That'll work. But you start to believe it because everyone around you is saying it, and it turns out that one little stumble you make is the stumble that ends your career.
Right.
And you thought it was just a little stumble because you couldn't do any wrong. Well, you fucked up big time, as it turns out. That's why the people who tell you can, don't listen to them.
Because in the end, you know what your capabilities are. You know what you can do.
Right. And in the end, it's your choice.
Yeah.
And it's really about keeping the power you have over yourself to yourself. It's not a power anyone else should have.
Exactly.
these people who say, well, so and so made me angry. Bullshit. You chose to get angry as a reaction to what so and so did or said.
Yeah, and like the idea of personal control, I mean, to sort of tie it back, um, is directly antithetical to any sort of contract that's implicit in a society, because the contract is there for an organization of people that say, without us you wouldn't be able to control yourself. If you can control yourself, and you can control yourself, then you don't need these people there to tell you what you can and can't do, and you shouldn't have any problem limiting yourself, and you shouldn't have to limit them. Just don't tread on me, motherfucker. I don't need a constitution.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was brought up on it, and I still believe in it. But I think because I believe in it as fiercely as I do, coupled with my also rather fierce sense of individuality, I think I don't need it. If you know what I mean.
And if you don't need it, then why don't you just defend yourself from those who do?
I defend myself when I defend myself.
There you
That's
go.
a choice I make. That's again back to that whole individuality thing.
Yeah.
Which ties in really well with the anarchy position, because
Yes.
it's all about self-reliance.
And it's all about self-control. If you can't control yourself, you can't rely on yourself. And somebody
Right.
else is going to control you when you start acting unethically. And that's why people say we need a government, because of all these unethical people. Horseshit. We just need these people to be either more ethical or dealt with.
Yes, and it's and when I say they need to be dealt with, it's not always plugging them in the head, with a hollow point. It's not. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about. Sometimes it's just that little slap to the back of the head.
Or like what. Like I'm separate person from most of society. My personality type, according to Myers-Briggs, is like 3% of the population. And that means that the way I handle things may not be the way other people handle things. And I understand and fully appreciate that. But at the same time, when I have a problem with somebody, I will let them know immediately. And the sort of passive aggressive buildup people are taught a lot of the time from the time they're children, don't talk about it now, tell a teacher, run to an authority figure or hold it in, reel it in. Don't say how you really feel, because words can hurt. No, fuck that. Say it immediately and as hostilely as you can, because this motherfucker's try to control you. That's what you should do.
Well, and that's, go on.
Just when you start to take more of that control, less violence is necessary, because when people know that there's a society of people out there who won't tolerate their shit, there will probably be less of it.
Right, there will. I mean, what's funny is in the scenario you painted there with, go tell a teacher or go tell another authority figure. That's just trading one master for another.
Yep.
And call me crazy, but as an American, and just fuck that, in fact, as me, it just doesn't sit well.
Right. And it shouldn't.
But, I do approach things a little bit differently than you do. I do spend a little more time observing a situation before I decide I'm going to put a stop to it.
Well, sometimes I do that. It depends on what the situation is.
Well, obviously, I'm not gonna wait to see how many shots he fires before I address the situation,
Right. So it's all about understanding and analyzing everything. And that's something a lot of people don't do.
Oh, people don't analyze for shit anymore. I mean, they make dumb decisions based on a dumb decision-making process.
And based on the security net, like if you have insurance, you'll be more likely to get into a car accident, because you'll be less likely to say, hey, this is my one shot with this car. I better not fuck it up.
Right. And what happened to create the need for auto insurance? I don't mean the legal requirement for it. I mean the genuine need. What happened?
Dumb people.
Well, no, there had to be some sort of a someone had to figure out that there was a scam they could perpetrate. It's like, we we can make more money if we raise prices on these repairs.
Oh,
But, you know,
you mean the corrupt auto insurance specifically?
yeah,
Okay, well that was after it became mandatory. Once
yeah,
it's mandatory and everybody has to have it, you have a steady market. Whereas if
yeah.
it's not
You have a good
mandatory,
revenue
people start
stream.
realizing that generally, and generally speaking, auto insurance companies tend to scam you a bit, have a little bit of a hustle. People stop getting it. So make it mandatory, force people to have it, and if they don't have it, they're scared shitless while waiting for this very dangerous man to tell them that they're free to go.
Yeah.
And take away a
Well,
lot of their
the point
labor in the
is,
process.
all of these things, not everything we've discussed, but things like the insurance and the taxes, it all boils down to one concept: pay me or else.
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly what happens. I mean, when I worked at one place and when I told them I didn't want health insurance, I didn't want to pay for it. They're like, well, yeah, but you could get sick. And I'm like, I could, yeah, but I won't
And if I do,
because
it's
I
none
don't
of your
have health
damn
insurance.
business.
Well, yeah, but it's like they wanted to, and I'm not talking to anyone in the company or with the insurance agency that they contracted with. I'm talking just regular coworkers. You could get sick, but I won't. I will
Yeah.
make sure that I won't. I'll take care of myself instead. I don't want that safety net. I don't want to spend, thousands of dollars a year for something I'm not going to use. I'm going to take care of myself regardless. Why spend the money if I don't need to?
Well, because there is some value to being covered if something happens, but that coverage could come from multiple places. Why
Yeah, saving
patronize
money.
a business who will inflate the value when you could just have a better savings account and savings habits? Well, because people are
Yes.
lazy.
Well, it's because people want something else now. They want their cell phone or they want their latest piece of fashionable jewelry. And I
Yeah.
am talking about men too when I say that because they're out there now. Man who wears a man bun. That guy.
Yeah, most
And I'm not
older
talking.
ponytail.
I'm not talking about the guy who has long hair who wears a man bun, but he's bad enough. I'm talking about the guy who buys like the clip-on or the fake man bun to wear.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That guy.
Yeah.
That guy is why insurance prices are too high.
Yeah,
Because
they're
he's more
unfortunate.
concerned about making his fashion statement than he is about saving his money. I don't care if it's $2. I don't care if it's $10. I don't care if it's 30 cents, man. Hold on to it as long as you can because there's always going to be someone out there trying to take it from you.
Yeah,
And they're going to try to
absolutely.
convince you that you're a willing participant.
Hey, somewhat like the Bill of Rights, huh?
Why do you want to keep throwing that at me? I mean, it's my value system.
Yeah.
I'm not walking away from it. I'm not saying that it's got teeth because I kind of agree with you on that level where it's like, if the people who swear to protect and defend it don't protect and defend it, then it's pointless.
Well, so
Yeah,
if
that's
it's your value system, see, to me, values need to be sort of positive. And those are all negative statements. They're don't do this, shall not be infringed. If you have values, I would say that it's more of what it implies, and probably some other things as well that are your value system. I would say, your value system is, I will defend myself with a gun. I will say what I want, and I will say that you should be able to as well. I will give you the freedom of your religion as long as you give me the freedom of mine. I will not molest your property as long as you do not molest mine. That sort of thing. That's more of a value structure to me than specifically saying this is the Bill of Rights. I'm not saying you have the right to that gun. I'm saying you have the right to not have that gun taken from you because I have the right to have my own personal self-defense, and so do you.
well, yeah. I mean, that's just it, though. Is in my head, when I point to the Bill of Rights as my value system, I'm saying that I apply that not just to myself, but to everyone.
Right.
I mean, that for me, that's the common ground that we all stand on. That's the starting point.
And culturally speaking, that's a great starting ground. But if it's the only starting ground, I would argue that it's an ineffective one. And like in the
I
same way
don't.
that it has no teeth to the U.S. government, it has no teeth to somebody who won't follow it. So I would say specifically that if you want the Bill of Rights to be effective, the first step is to realize how ineffective it is with certain people, and say, well, absolutely, this is what I believe, but that doesn't mean that it should be a bill.
Yeah, I agree with that. It
Because like I
shouldn't.
still support most of that. I was a conservative.
Well, yeah, people mistakenly believe that I am, but that's another thing. Is um, my values cross over into conservative. They cross over into liberal. Um, they they sometimes are very atheistic in nature, and there's sometimes elements of certain uh, religious things that I agree with as well.
Right.
And certain values there, I should say, not like the ooga booga stuff, but the stuff that has real world application. I agree with a lot of that stuff too. And
Like
basically, it's go on.
like not necessarily because God says so, but because you believe it.
Well, because I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, like do unto others as you would have them do unto you makes sense, even if you're not a Christian, even if you're a Buddhist. From a Buddhist perspective, most of them anyway, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, thou shalt not murder is a good example. I agree
Yeah.
with that. I mean, it doesn't. It see people mistakenly read that. It got mistranslated to "thou shalt not kill." That I
Yeah.
don't believe in. But "thou shalt
Absolutely.
not murder," I believe in. Because they're
Yes.
different things.
Wait,
Murder is not an act of self-defense, for example.
yeah, and murder can't change if the government says it can. Like murder applies to natural law. It applies to more of a Bastiat law than a government law. It says, if you end somebody's life and they didn't harm any of your contracts or any of your possessions, then there is no ethical standing to that kill, and it's a murder.
Right. Exactly. But in self-defense, you're damn right. I'm going to bite your fucking throat out. And I'm probably going to try to tongue kiss you to feed it to you. Just to make the whole incident a little more interesting and spicy and to appeal to my sense of humor. In short, if I have to defend myself, I'm going to do it creatively. If I have to.
That's a good
I'd rather
deterrent.
be direct. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. What do you find more frightening? A guy coming at you with a gun or a guy coming at you with a machete?
It depends on if the guy's already covered in blood.
Yeah, that's true too, I guess. But I figure the guy with the machete is a little more frightening because that may not necessarily be a quick kill.
Well,
the
and
gun
also
won't necessarily be either, but a guy with a gun is more, I think, has a greater interest in instant gratification than the guy with the machete.
Yeah.
The guy with the machete might toy with you a little bit.
Which is fine.
Well, if you deserve it, yeah.
And if you don't, then you could have a machete of your own. I've never seen a machete fight. That'd be interesting.
Well, it'd probably be very much like Eskrima.
Probably.
That's why I have two machetes.
Yeah, I'm just getting started with Cali, so I'm not confident enough to use bladed weapons for it yet. Well, I mean, for some of it. Like, I could definitely do some of the swimming, but at this point, I'm not, confident enough to go out there with a stick and knife and fuck some shit up yet.
Well, I did used to practice a lot with some other people when it came to bladed. We'd use dummy weapons, obviously.
Yeah.
Because we weren't interested at that particular moment in killing each other or seeing who could draw first blood. But man, we did get some banged up knuckles.
Yeah. My hands and my elbows have gotten a decent battering from practice with certain people.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, with everybody I've practiced with, but Because like the fun part is when you learn to keep practicing very quickly after getting hit in a very sensitive area, because that's when you're
Yes.
getting your toughness levels up. So the way I
Yep.
see it, it's a total package. You
It
know,
really
you
is.
you get the skills as to what to do with the weapons and your body in general, and you also get the ability to handle what somebody else could do with the same weapons to your body.
Well, the thing I've always found particularly attractive about training with training to use bladed weapons, swords, machetes, knives, is any stick in a pinch can
Yeah.
become that weapon.
And of course,
You
when you
know,
get started learning, like with those sorts of weapons, you start to learn where your biomechanics are, and you can start using your
yes.
body more effectively. Like even
Oh
if
yeah.
there's nothing nearby.
It does make watching Star Wars a bit painful though.
Well, ballerinas are fantastic fighters if you give them glow swords.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's too much turning your back to the enemy that just is bound to go wrong.
Well, but they have
It's,
the force, and that makes
I
everything
don't care.
okay.
Bullshit. No, that's bullshit. If you and I go head to head with bladed weapons, we're on equal terms. If
Yep.
two people using the force go head to head with bladed energy weapons, they're on equal terms. You might
Well,
be a
and
little better with the sword than I am, but that doesn't mean you're going to turn your back on me and present me an easy target.
that's why one of the many reasons I've never really appreciated Star Wars to begin with, because like the whole concept of all of these dramatic battles happening with people who can control energy with their mind. Like this Jedi can control energy with his mind, but he somehow can't make an effective enough shield for all of these energy bullets coming at him.
Yeah.
Scientifically speaking, I mean, I get that this is like based on modern knowledge, but scientifically speaking, you can cancel out any sort of like um energetic frequency with one that competes
With an
with its
opposing.
wavelength.
Yeah.
And so just make that energy wavelength, use the force, fucking masturbate in a cave for 4 years until you're strong enough. And then, go out into the field, build a giant energy shield, and obliterate anybody who crosses through it. Why is that hard? Like, I mean, it works perfectly in existing sci-fi, like um ablative energy fields in Star Trek. Like, just Star Wars is not good.
No, I mean, well, to be fair, Star Wars never really focused on the technical aspect of everything. It was very
Unfortunately.
much, it was fortunately for Star Wars, because there'd be a lot of unanswered questions, and and if they tried to answer them all now, it would be like, what? No, you stole that from Star Trek. But, but, yeah, it's always been, they've got a big ship.
Yep.
They've got a big spaceship, and it shoots the green shit at you. That's Star Wars. It's very surface level.
Sort of like the
It's
state.
like, yeah, actually.
Big showy entertainment, but in the end, it's got giant vulnerabilities and a very easy way to access them.
Well, it's like George Carlin said, when he said he doesn't vote. He's like, I'm sure you'll have fun watching your latest presidential election. I'm sure once your candidate is in office, your country will improve immediately.
Yep.
Being completely ironic when he said it. And it was, well, I think that was actually more sarcastic, but he's right. The shit we shuffle around every 4 years is meaningless.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, unless someone actually holds up the Constitution and uses that as their campaign platform, and then gets into office and sticks to it, it's all meaningless.
Yeah.
It really is reduced to shit that gets shuffled around.
And like the people in charge of the whole thing profit over it, especially well when shit goes wrong. So you can't trust even those people to be completely honest with you. Why would you?
It's not in their interest.
Yeah.
And
And so if they're not honest, then all you're doing is relying on lies to produce more lies.
And if they could, I'd be happy for them to make their money within that framework. I would, that would be great.
If it
But
happens.
they won't. What's that?
If it happened.
Yeah, that's the thing. It won't happen. They're too invested in working outside of that framework.
And even then, like, to me, I'm fucking 24 going on 25. I've got 75 years, or at least something close to it, left to fight these motherfuckers, and I'm well invested. So I don't think I'm ever gonna stop. Like, even if it becomes a more utopian government, it won't be my cup of tea. I'll put it that way.
No, it probably won't. I mean, even that tax system I proposed at 10%, I still think that's too much.
0%. Ron Paul.
Yes. I mean, that's the ideal thing for me. But I'm up against a thing where I know that things can't happen. This kind of change is not going to happen in one fell swoop.
Absolutely. So we got to decentralize.
Yeah, and we have to do it piece by piece. It's not going to all come crashing down and then have the new thing in place immediately.
Right.
It just won't happen. I mean, first, like we were discussing, first thing you have to do is convince people not to break the cycle, but that there is a cycle to be broken, actually.
Yeah, which is why I always start with I'm an anarchist, so that they ask me all these crazy questions like, wouldn't there be chaos? Well, isn't there chaos now? What about the Bilderberg Group? Ordo ab Chao, created by, Freemasons and fucking people very heavily invested in making sure shit goes wrong. Like, that's not chaos.
I can give you an example that's more relevant to everyone's experience. When they were talking about repealing the Affordable Care Act, people kept asking, well, what are you going to replace it with? And that is the wrong question. And that's something I'll always tell them. That's not the question. The question is, why do we need it?
Yep.
Give me one good reason why we need it, something like that. And
a good reason. Not just any.
Give me a good reason. Yeah. Give me a good reason why we need it, and I will refute that reason in no time flat.
And why aren't you trying to create a better environment where less people get sick? You're going to entrust the same government that still tests nuclear equipment to this health and well-being of the world? No, don't.
Well, not only it goes beyond government too, really. I mean, you're going to keep buying stuff with high fructose corn syrup in it.
Or Diet Coke. I mean, you'll get obese either way.
Yeah, pretty much. They'll tell me, well, we all have to work to make make the environment better. Yeah. Stop buying the stuff with the high fructose corn syrup. You can find options.
Yeah. Or like these people who say, like, we need to improve the environment, like James Cameron motherfuckers who have like mansions or go like on big jets to fucking events. Those people aren't helping. Those people are hurting more than anybody else, and then screaming at everybody else to be better. Their mansions aren't just houses. They're fucking water sinks. They're giant plots of land that could be serving more than one family. They're like, you could hold a hotel resort on a lot of these places. And, this is all considered fine, though, because these people made Avatar or, did something else that the people liked. And it's sort of that spoonful of sugar that made the medicine go down. And that medicine is the fucked up nature of the world.
Well, yeah, kind of. I mean, I know in my case, if I had that kind of money, if I got it now,
the fuck you money.
What the what?
The fuck you money, where you can say fuck you to anyone and you can afford the consequences.
Oh yeah, let's say that one of those Mega Million jackpots got up to like $500 million or a full billion, and I won that. Okay, let's say I come into money that quickly. I'm not going to buy a big place. It's a big vacuuming headache, and I don't want to pay anyone to do it. I'm too fucking cheap. So
plus,
I'll buy
what happens
myself.
if you get stolen from?
Yeah.
Would you even notice that thing missing in that room? How long would it take?
Right. What, am I going to go through every room in a 200-room mansion every day? Fuck no.
You come back from work. I've got to make sure everything is still here. Check the pressure sensors.
I just I just won
All
I just
right.
won $1 billion. I'm not
You
going
come
to
back from
work.
like golfing.
Oh God, no.
Well, you just won a
See,
billion. You're
that's
a
what I mean.
billionaire. You have golf now. It's your
No,
life.
no, never. And I'll tell you why. Because I've already figured out what the things I love to do are, and they are simple things. They're inexpensive things. Yeah, I might go on a vacation. I might go on a cruise ship to see if I get sick, so I could hang over the side while everyone else is getting the disease that turns your internal organs to liquid shit. Because that's apparently the new fad is be sick on a or go on a cruise ship where everyone gets sick.
Well, people get sick because they're dumbasses and they go to remote locations with food and atmospheres that they're not used to. They
Yes.
get stung by a mosquito and then they cry about how terrible their life is. Try living there, motherfucker. Don't be a
Yeah.
tourist, be a living, breathing example of how terrible it is. Oh, but that's hard. Well, so is their life. You want to, if anything, use it as a learning experience of how good you have it when you're not shitting your guts out on a daily basis when it only happens like 2 days a month.
Right.
Once.
When you're in that constant state of dehydration,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
then they go home
then
and they
talk
cry
about it.
about their first world problems, including that, but they're not ever going to think about how hard they made it on the person who was cleaning up after them when they were over at
Right.
the fucking restroom. They just
Exactly.
nobody gives a shit. They're just lazy and motherfuckers who don't give a shit.
And that's I think that's one of the advantages for thinking people who start getting a little bit older. I'm at that midlife crisis point. I'm at the point I should be buying a red sports car and trying to date an 18-year-old woman.
With no roof.
Right.
Convertible.
Absolutely.
But you just store the roof in your garage.
Because I need to feel the wind through my scalp because I'm going bald, Horseshit.
I hope that never happens to me.
It will. I used to have hair like that. I'm just saying it will.
It's sort of like the Skyrim quote, like, I used to be an adventurer like you, then I took an arrow to knee.
Kind of. Something like that.
Yeah.
But no, see, I think for thinking people, once you reach a certain age, you really realize the shit that you don't need. And if you come into a big old sloppy wad of money, you're gonna invest it. You're gonna set probably, like I would set some aside for like scholarships.
I have a few companies that I'd start. A few.
Yeah, I'd probably do that too. Stark International, Wayne Enterprises.
Because there have been things that I've wanted to fund for a long time and that I'm going to work toward funding anyway. But if it just happened that I came into the cash required for it, oh man, the world would know my name in the next fucking month.
Yeah. Well, see, my scholarships would be based on, I wouldn't base them on the shit that other people do. There are some religious scholarships where, you got to write the essay about, your relationship with God or whatever. It wouldn't be anything like that. I would have scholarships based on grades in certain classes. They would be very specific. It wouldn't be like, how you did with any of the social engineering type programs in the schools, but it would be like how you did with mathematics, how you did with literature. I'd have different scholarships for like each for each field rather.
Well,
I would also require like
go ahead.
like a short dissertation on what it means to be free.
That would be good.
Because I would want to know that the people I am funding to get that higher education understand what freedom is and understand what individuality means and the value it holds.
Well, and then like to me, my scholarships wouldn't go based on grades. They would go based on who seemed the most marginalized by the mechanisms of society. And that would be the thinkers, the people that get constantly told, you've got like psychological disorders like ODD, oppositional defiance disorder. I would say like, one scholarship for anybody with that, because that's what's gonna break the system. I want people to expand the use of the skills that government doesn't want them to have, whatever those skills are, because that's the way forward. That's the way to revolution.
You know, another thing I would do is I know people who have certain like genetic diseases. One girl I know has cystic fibrosis, and she's basically like Chewbacca. You know, I call her Chewie because, well, she's a Wookiee. Let's put it that. She's got a temper like a Wookiee. She'll pull your arms out of your sockets. It's hilarious. But she's got cystic fibrosis, and she's put together her own foundation and stuff like that. But if I had that kind of money, I'd be I don't think I would fund someone else's research. I think I would hire a team myself and have them start doing research.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is like with a lot of the nationwide charities and whatnot, you know, 95% of the donations go toward administrative costs, and that I want to do away with all that shit. I'm going to be like Scientist Jim and Scientist Dave and Scientist Steve. You work for me. Start working on this.
Yeah.
Go. Start now.
Oh, for
Go.
reference, like everybody here, including you, if you haven't already, should find out what your Myers-Briggs personality is. You should.
Well, I did. We discussed it the other day.
Yeah, I don't remember how that discussion went, but like definitely like 16personalities.com. Everybody who listened to this and it will listen to this should go there, because once you find out how where you're at in society, you can start to manipulate that. Like, I'm ENTJ, and that means that I will always be in the role where I'll be better telling people what to do than being told what to do. And I think that realizing that you're better suited to one role or another can help you like understand what tools you have as a person. And I think that helps a lot of people.
I see. I came in as a logician. I can't remember the letter designation. I remember there was an N and a T. I want to think there was an I, but I'm not sure because I don't remember that stuff. Because I viewed it as like a piddling detail. But I read through the whole report. Yeah, I came up as a logician. I was in that same 3% type bracket that you're in.
Yeah, that would be INTJ, I think. No, INTP.
I think it was INTP.
Yeah. Yeah, I just Googled it. All right, so
I can't wait till the LGBT throw that at the end of LGBT, because they will.
Like, just you find somebody who's graduated from college with like a PhD in like gender studies, and they're like Dr. Shaquanana Rosala, and like the after that they'll have like, you know, LD and then INTP, like -A positive T and all of that shit. Fucking
they've been coded, categorized, and easily referenced.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, I am that sort of guy. Like, I've been compared to that to fucking Scully a lot. But you know, it's a matter of knowing where you are. And I think there are some coders and catalogers and referencers, and there are some people like the NT types, and there are some people that are coded, cataloged, and referenced. And I think that people would be fine with that once they found that out, unless they had aspirations to change their personality type, which is possible. You know, in which case they would need to find out what those traits were and really hone them to be that way. Because I can guarantee you I was not an ENTJ my whole life, especially not when I was like 12, 14, when I was in my like hyper-conservative Bush supporting days.
Let's see, I am an introvert too. That's why go on.
I am an extrovert.
Let's see, and it's funny because somehow through this kind of media, through you know, with the internet to act as a buffer between me and other people, I probably come off as way more extroverted than I really am. And I think I am becoming more extroverted because, and I think it's a function of age again, because I'm just getting tired of just listening to shit and not correcting it.
and dealing with shit and not having anything to do about it.
Yeah. It's like it's like I've kind of reached the end of my rope, or my candles just burned down far enough where I'm like, hey, I got to make the rest of this wax count.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah. Sorry, go on.
Well, I'm not like 40 yet. I'm 24, but I forced myself because I'm an ENTJ and like I'm better at telling myself what to do than anybody else. And like because of that, I forced myself to really take a critical look at the world and realize how terrible it is. And like a lot of people aren't willing to do that, especially a lot of people who are young and have like the world handed to them. And like I'm not one of those people. So to me, like it was very easy to settle into the role of being very critical. And when I did, I got pissed off at everything. And like that was my personal choice. And I realized that it could be a tool. Anger could be a tool. And once
Oh,
it
yeah.
became a tool, it became much less of a task. Like I could access everything much more readily.
Yes. See, I have sort of an opposite approach, actually. And this is one of my great secrets. This is one of my great philosophical. This is one of my Yoda moments. How's that? um, I firmly believe that the three most powerful words ever devised are "I don't care."
Well,
And
I
the
can agree to
reason,
that.
my reason for that is if I'm in I've worked in a kitchen before, and when you're in a situation where all of a sudden 10 gallons of sauce decide to find their way to the floor, you're going to get angry and you're going to respond a certain way. But what I learned was to just tell myself, I don't care. That prevents me from getting angry, prevents me from wasting that energy, and it gets me focused on just dealing with the situation and getting it handled now. Instead of just, because if I'm angry, I'm going to be waving my arms around. People think I'm trying to fly because I'm so pissed off. But I finally I actually have a really bad temper. And once I learned those three words and what they really mean, I was able to use those three words to divorce myself from the emotional context of the particular situation and just address the situation.
Well, I can see the value of that, and I do try to do that in a lot of circumstances, but a lot of them I just, I find it's a very ineffective buffer, and I don't like, I get immediately much more angry afterward. So, like, my normal response is to just let the anger be constant because I've found that when I don't really work to be happy, which is most of the time, when I don't really work to be happy, I'm angry most of the time. And I'm also very effective when I'm angry. And when I'm happy, I'm just sort of relaxed. So, like, for me, I try to foster the sorts of things that could keep me on edge. And, like, that's what lets me deal with things in a split moment. It's not that I'm, throwing up my hands or that my temper is high. It's that my temper is high, so I attack the spilled sauce or, whatever it is,
Well, see,
So,
it's interesting because um, the result of my method in me and the result of your method in you is very similar.
the mess gets cleaned up.
Yes. The situation is dealt with, and
Yes.
a hell of a lot faster than it would be otherwise.
Yeah, especially if I have like a team that I can, instruct what to do. Like, like if I see a sauce bucket get spilled, like I'm just continuing the analogy. If I see a sauce bucket get spilled, like I can tell one person to wipe some of it into the drainage area with a squeegee, and then I can tell another person to mop it afterwards, and then I can
Yeah.
tell another person to put a fan where the area is, so that the area remains relatively dry. And
Yeah.
and when I get to the spill a little later, or when I'm a part of that process and I'm still generally involved in the planning, it gets done much faster than when other people did it. And like it's come to my attention over the past several years that like this personality profile is useful. It's very useful because when I found out I was a commander, I sort of started to use that, and it's gotten so much more done, and
Well,
that's what I need.
it does help to have like a neutral party be like, okay, this is where your strengths lie, and this is a way you can use them.
Yeah,
And that's going to be fantastic. In that, when I did that test, I actually knew how it would turn out, because I mean that's just because I've had 20 something more years to stare at my life and to work it out on my own. It wasn't because I was some sort of hyper intelligence at all. It was just experience.
yeah,
I mean, shit, I'm in a lot of places I've always been the Sherlock Holmes kind of character. I despised being around people. I looked at things objectively. I tried to observe every detail of something I could. I would question people when something would come up, and I would actually get angry with them before I knew the tricks to control myself. I'd get angry with them when they didn't pay attention to all the details like I would have.
yeah.
And I was always that kind of thing. So, just through self-reflection over 46 years, I was able to determine that without the test, but the test was interesting.
Yeah, well, because my problem that arose in my life is that I adopted a lot of traits very quickly because they seemed to work, and then when they seemed to work, I started to foster them. Like my pessimistic cynicism, I've had that for like 5-6 years now. But it all started out with realizing that optimism and a general positive outlook doesn't lead to problem solving in my experience. And so like my attitude became, how can I best be negative then? And being a pessimistic cynic made sense. And then sort of realizing that the reason a lot of people don't get things done is because they're not willing to do the uncomfortable thing, whatever that uncomfortable thing is. That sort of made me more of an E and a J person, recognizing, going out into the world enough to recognize the traits in people that needed judgment, including myself, especially myself. Like, for all of the judgments I give other people, for all of the analysis I give, and for all of the amount of time I spend telling others, like, what I feel is their shortcoming, whatever that shortcoming may be, I've probably spent 4 or 5 times that amount of time telling myself that amount of stuff that day. And, that's to me why I think people have such a critical failing. Not only are they not willing to do the uncomfortable thing and maybe call somebody out, but they're also not willing to call themselves out because that's really uncomfortable. And they're lazy. Yeah. They want to do the comfortable, lazy thing, whatever that is.
Well, yeah, to spin it back to the Bill of Rights, I can give you a good example of that kind of self-examination. As a rule, I despise any indoctrination. When you brought up the Pledge of Allegiance and I called it indoctrination, that's why. It's because I despise indoctrination, even if it's for something that I agree with. And right now, I take the Pledge of Allegiance. I know what I'm getting myself into. It's informed consent. We're back to that. But I hate indoctrination of any kind. And I constantly come up against myself on that because, when I'm out there in a blog or in a video promoting something like the Bill of Rights, am I attempting to indoctrinate?
Yeah, I constantly think about things like that.
Am I doing this thing that I hate? And my answer invariably comes to yes, I am.
Yeah.
And, but this is where I begin to rationalize it too, because I look at the stuff in the Bill of Rights, and when I apply it to myself as a code of values or code of ethics or whatever, I tell myself that this kind of a code of ethics allows for people to be individuals and to, and it keeps me from asserting my judgment or authority where I don't have any authority, that kind of thing. And I justify it that way because it really allows for other people to do their thing and for me to do my thing.
Right.
But it's still indoctrination. I can't get away from that.
Well, the idea I think should be to like really analyze whatever you're saying so that you make sure that if you do end up indoctrinating somebody, either intentionally or not, that person is walking away with some base of knowledge that won't end up hurting their activism or ethics or anything. Be
Right.
the change.
Yes, and and it's also why I lean pretty strongly on the concept of individuality, because I think without the concept of individuality, looking at the Bill of Rights as a code of ethics is kind of meaningless.
Yeah, well,
You know,
and like I have no problem, for reference, using the Bill of Rights as a code of ethics in a general sense. What I would say though is that like it should be supplementary to a core set of values that should exist independent of it, because otherwise, the U.S. government collapses, and people that think like you, may, like, not exactly like you, but like you, may try to establish a new government rather than letting the anarchists do their work. And that sort of sense of force, because we must use this form of documentation as the basis of X. I think that that's a functional fixatedness, like not necessarily that applies to you, but that it certainly applies to a lot of people, that has hindered anarchy and promoted government chaos for a very long time. So I sort of want to throw out the vestiges.
it does apply to me, but I apply it to me. If you know what I mean, I don't insist that anyone else apply it to them.
Right. Well, the U.S. government does, absolutely.
Well, yes, absolutely they do, and they don't even use that. They do it on arbitrary grounds more than anything else.
Well, they do it when it suits them, and when it doesn't, then
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. It's like it's does this guy with this YouTube channel line up with our way of thinking? No. Oh, let's throw a tax audit at him.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. That's what I mean by the government. That's what they do.
Yeah.
But the Bill of Rights is I actually kind of view it as a restriction on what I will allow myself to do to other people.
Well, right. Although that could just boil down to the non-aggression principle. So, I mean, that's why when I heard about the non-aggression principle, like, to me, that was sort of the be-all and end-all. Don't initiate force against somebody else's rightfully held boundaries. Don't commit fraud, because it's essentially the same thing, and you're good.
Yeah.
I can't see any way that could be violated. And still have the person act ethically. And I don't see how maintaining it could possibly lead to an unethical lifestyle.
No, it shouldn't be able to.
But the Bill of Rights, you can violate that and still be ethical.
Yeah, there's ways to work around it.
Right.
And that's usually, I have found that the people interested in working around that kind of thing are the ones who do want to apply their own rules and standards to other people.
Right. Absolutely. But that's
why individualism, I think, is a good counter to it.
Right. Well, or if you do need a core set of ethical principles, non-aggression principle works.
Yes, it does.
Because everything else can sort of branch out from the idea of self-ownership, non-aggression, and voluntary interaction.
Yeah. That's I love that phrase, voluntary interaction. Because that's telling someone that you don't consent to a particular interaction can stop a lot of things.
Absolutely.
And if it can't, it means that they're being aggressive.
And you can stop them ethically.
Yes. See, that's a weird thing. I know that in some ways that societies need some sort of law to function, or some sort of a principle to function. I mean, and the non-aggression principle is probably the best one there is.
Well, right.
But at the same time, I try to wrap my head around the what if scenario. I try to come up with the what if scenario where I can challenge myself to figure out how to apply that and still serve the needs of justice, for example.
Right.
And it's not always easy. And I'm glad it's not easy, to be honest, because it requires me to seek out new information.
Well, and then there comes the cost benefit thing. Like,
Yeah.
okay, so maybe the new society requires a lot of thought of like what could go wrong. But if you compare it directly, like the worst thing that anarchy could provide with the worst thing that the state has provided, the state loses every single time. Like if you think like what would happen in anarchy, what has happened in statism, what has happened under the power of government. And if you start to look at that, if you start to really analyze the sort of structures, there are two quotes that I think really nicely wrap up the way I think of this sort of thing. And those two quotes, the first one I'll read is directly related to the last thing I said, and then the next thing is related to law in general. But like when I look up, for instance, Robert Higgs quotes, I end up with the idea that anarchists did not try to carry out genocide against the Armenians in Turkey. They did not deliberately starve millions of Ukrainians. They did not create a system of death camps to kill Jews, Gypsies, and Slavs in Europe. They did not firebomb scores of large German and Japanese cities and drop nuclear bombs on two of them. They did not carry out a great leap forward that killed scores of millions of Chinese. They did not attempt to kill everybody with any appreciable education in Cambodia. They did not launch one aggressive war after another. They did not implement trade sanctions that killed perhaps 500,000 Iraqi children. In debates between anarchists and statists, the burden of proof clearly should rest on those who have placed their trust in the state. Anarchy's mayhem is wholly conjectural, and the state's mayhem is undeniably factually horrendous. That's Robert Higgs. And then there's Frederick Bastiat, who wrote a great book. I recommend it. It's one of the things that I carry a physical copy of whenever I'm about to go discuss politics in public. It's one of my Bibles, along with like economics in one lesson. And his book, The Law, contains this line: socialism, like the ancient ideas from which it springs, confuses the distinction between government and society. As a result of this, every time we object to a thing being done by government, the socialists conclude that we object to its being done at all. We disapprove of state education, then the socialists say that we are opposed to any education. We object to a state religion, then the socialists say that we want no religion at all. We object to a state-enforced equality, and then they say that we are against equality, and so on and so on. It is as if the socialists were to accuse us of not wanting persons to eat because we do not want the state to raise grain. That's Frederick Bastiat. Both of those apply wonderfully to this situation and pretty much every situation, because if the anarchist society is what's under question, you can eventually say, the statist society has proven itself to be shit, and the anarchist society has a huge amount of leeway in terms of improving things for the greater good, for the individual good, whatever good that is.
It's funny too, because I don't remember if I've told you the story or not. During this last campaign, when Bernie Sanders was still, before he sold out, I'm going to be honest about it. He's a sellout. Before Bernie Sanders sold out, a girl I worked with who's just gotten into college, and so she's and she's young too, so she's wrapped up in a bunch of those socialist ideas. And she knowing that I'm a big Constitution and Bill of Rights guy, asked me one night at work, "Do you think that socialism could work?" And I told her yes, as long as people are free to not engage. And yeah. I think she wasn't ready for that. I think she expected me to throw out a simple no, and that would be that. But I can't throw out a simple no, because throwing out a simple no disabuses people of their freedom to choose.
Well, also like I guess 2 points to that. Like if it's if it's state socialism, then the original framers of the ideas of socialism wouldn't call that socialism. And if you if you really analyze socialism, there's a lot of meat there. And so there's a more nuanced answer that's required. Like the longest book in the sort of Austrian economics and libertarian sphere that I think I've like, 'cause I'm not even done with it yet, and I've been pecking away at it for a while now, is Mises' Socialism. It's a treatise on socialism, and it's like, depending on the edition you get, it could be like over 1,000 pages alone on that subject from that perspective. And that's like, he still has other writings too, like, well, he's dead now, of course. He still has a wealth of other writings on the subject other than that book. That book was just basically his introduction to the ideas of like failures of socialism and where it could have improved, and where is essentially, if they really wanted a free society, they could have stopped at any point, but they didn't. And that's, it's a nuanced read, and I would definitely recommend reading it. But if you do get through it like within the next few months, you would certainly be further ahead than I am, because I peck away at it every now and then, but I also have like articles that I'm reading and all that other shit. So, and it's very long. So I would recommend it, but it's long.
See that I've actually kind of stopped reading books for about the last 3-4 years now. Not in any particular genre or anything like that. Just in general, I've just stopped. I've not because I don't think there's anything more to learn. I think I'm happy with where I stand. But then I run into someone like you who challenges some of my ideas, and I think one thing that I come up against is I want it to be my ideas that are challenged, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I'd rather do it this way than through reading a book. This is more interesting because I can't ask questions of a book. I have to wait till I get there.
Yeah. And of course, if you read like a dead dude, you can't even talk to him on Twitter, even if you would have in the first place. Like, which, by the way, you should definitely get on Twitter before it dies, because it's a decent way to communicate short ideas. But
that's why I went with Gab, actually.
Well, I'm on both because, like, I think broadening to every platform increases your potential audience size.
Well, yes,
that's me.
I might do it. I've just been on the fence with it because I feel like I'm contributing to a thing I don't believe in when it comes to Twitter.
Well, I mean, if that's the case, then you should definitely just switch over to Gab and do these conversations on Skype, because YouTube's owned by Google and they're fucked up.
Yes, I agree.
See, because my idea is like, sort of like using roads. I'm not going to stop using roads or sidewalks or anything and just walk on the dirt as a statement. Like, to me, I'm going to...
It's not a statement. It's just something I have to get over within myself. Honestly, there's part of me that says, you know what? Take advantage of those bastards while you can.
Yes, use their services against them.
Yes. And that's what I'm doing. Well, I already know that Steve Shives would block me right away.
Oh, he blocked me, but I don't even think I've ever said anything to him. Like, well, that's what I mean. Before he blocked me?
He uses, I think he uses a bot to, he'll block one person, and if that person is connected to 3 people, they'll get blocked, and so on and so on.
I have no doubt I'm on some block bot somewhere for being a Gamergate supporter, because like, I'm not on the main ones, and I can search that, but I can't search whether I'm on any of them or not. And so I guarantee I'm on one of them, because there are a lot of people that I've never said a word to, and they block me.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure I'd get blocked pretty damn quick.
Yeah,
even though
if you said something to him. Like, I mean, unless, of course, it's one of those bots that automatically adds whoever you're affiliated with, like some NSA watch list, like you're one hop away from me. So, like, they're going to have a problem with you. But, like, if there's not, like, there's still or if there is, there's still a gigantic audience of people that aren't affiliated with those block bots. So, like, if your goal is to reach Steve Shives, I mean, you can't, even if you're reasonable and even if you're anyone.
Well, yeah, I know
But
that. I was
but you
just
can
thinking
reach
it
a
would be.
lot of people.
I was just thinking it would be really fun to sign up with Twitter and immediately just go, "Hi, Steve," you know, and just
It'd be amusing to see if that was all it took.
yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
I might do it just for that shit, and then just use the service to my own ends.
Yeah, well, if you do and you want to talk specifically anarchy, like I've got some interesting messaging groups that I could add you to. So if you're interested in that, then we could definitely do that. And of course, my Discord and everything is always up.
Oh yeah, well, that's the other reason is I even hesitated to get on Gab because a lot of times when I want to express an idea, what they give me to use is not big enough.
Yeah.
I'll go on for paragraphs just to say, so and so sucks, because it's not enough for me just to say so and so sucks. I have to back it up with something or provide a demonstration or even find that take that no one else is using to describe a particular situation and run with that take.
Yeah. Well, if you're interested, like I run a site and I'm about to start publishing with it again. It's called timetofree.us. And what this site does is it's designed for anti-government content. So if you ever have a beef with the government and you decide that you want to get an account, let me know. Because you can write down, we won't take pro-government content unless it's in a debate format. But we're interested in any anti-government content from any perspective.
I'll give you a good piece. I've got several. I posted them on Minds already when I transferred a bunch of my stuff from my Facebook account to Minds, because I haven't done away with Facebook yet, but I hardly ever use that even.
All right. Well, you can anybody interested, anybody listening, you can like find a way to get in contact with me. There are plenty in the thing description. The thing,
yeah.
The thing is very descriptive.
Yeah.
But
go to the thing and click the doohickey.
Yeah.
And once the thingamajig blinks, run left.
Exactly.
Really fast. And if something gets in your way, turn.
Or just duck.
Yes.
It might have like a high hanging thing.
Never trust a duck. You never know what to make of ducks.
Yes. It may walk like a duck and quack like a duck, but not be a duck.
Yeah, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, its intentions are still unclear.
Yes. So, but find a way to get in contact with me, and then if you're interested in setting up an account, just send me an email and the name you want me to work with.
Right on. And the I had something else to throw in there, and I can't remember what it was. Oh, but one of the things that I do with the Bill of Rights and the amendments to the Constitution is I typically find where government institutions are doing things that are in distinct violation. I mean, clearly in violation. One of my favorite examples is in a lot of the high schools now, in order to graduate, you have to perform some sort of community service. You have to do some sort of volunteer work. And if my contention is, if you have to do volunteer work, it is no longer volunteer work.
Well, and the interesting part of that, the idea that it's not constitutional is directly interfered with by Lincoln. Because when Lincoln, quote, ended slavery, he didn't end anything. The only thing he did is made it universal and said essentially that the government gets to decide when that happens. Compulsory work is still there. He never took that out. The only thing he did is made it less racist, even though he was a racist motherfucker himself. I'm about to write a piece on that.
It's essentially the 13th Amendment, I'm going to run with that because I don't study Lincoln like I study the Constitution. The 13th Amendment clearly states that, well, fuck, I got to pull it up again because I'm an asshole. And if I don't read it right, I'm just not going to feel right within myself. Let's see. How do you spell 13? There it is. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Meanwhile, high school students who have committed no crime are being required to work for free
Yep.
in order to graduate. That, ladies and gentlemen, is slavery. They'll couch it in prettier words. Oh, but it
We're
teaches
getting
them
them
this.
involved in the community. Who
Yeah,
could be
they'll
against
couch
that?
bullshit. And that's bullshit. It's slavery. It's plain and simple. It's clear as the dick in Hillary Clinton's pants.
But it takes a village to raise a child.
No, it doesn't. And don't get me started on Melissa Harris Perry. What a fucking moron that woman is. But it says it right there. Except as punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted.
Well, if you think about it, statism is a crime for the crime of, or punishment for the crime of being alive.
Yeah, basically punished for the crime of being born. How dare you?
You were born on our soil, now you're ours, bitch.
Yep, sorry, not buying it. And
What?
That's one of the other things that I enjoy railing against is these people take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, and then they go and violate it that way, and they think nobody's going to notice. This was in a newspaper article about some big volunteer project that a bunch of students got together to do on their own. And someone had said in there that it's good because it prepares them for the requirement to graduate high school. And I was like, in no time flat going, I was responding on that article right away. It's like, you listen here, clearly according to the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, blah, 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 blah. And I went on my little tirade. And one thing I've noticed is, this is one reason I enjoy talking with you, Jeremiah, is you don't back down. Almost everyone that I have ever gotten into any kind of a debate with, once I pull out the Bill of Rights or the Constitution, they immediately shut up and they don't want to continue. I mean, I could say that I'm winning the debate, but I'm really not. They're giving up.
Yeah.
And that bothers me. It's like, come on, continue to challenge my idea. At least you came out and said, the Bill of Rights is toothless. I mean, I'm not going to say an attack, but it's an attack on the thing that I hold up as my system,
Yeah.
And, but I'm all for that. Most people who want to violate it, and you don't even want to violate it. That's the funny part.
I don't want to take your guns. I want you to have more variety.
Right. Why does it take a guy who doesn't want to violate my rights, as I see them even, to point out that my rights as I see them are kind of worthless because no one gives a shit about them at an official level? Why does it take someone who's not going to try to suppress me to put that idea in my head?
I don't know. Maybe it's because the established order has like more of a vested interest in like us fighting. And so they'd rather have like a very limited way that they protect us and then spend the rest of the time not protecting us and protecting their own interests. Maybe this sort of conversation has been ingrained in our brains as something that we shouldn't do. Even though, to me, I've been doing it for a while now, and I get more and more comfortable talking every time. But that's the thing. You got to train it out. You got to unlearn what the state wants you to think.
Oh, so you're pulling a Yoda. You got to unlearn what you've learned, and to some degree, that's exactly it. It's just I forgot what I was going to say again. God damn it! See what you did? You went Yoda on me. This is why the Jedi were so fucked up. I just find it weird that I think it's in part because the people who want to suppress aren't all that well informed about things like the Bill of Rights. They just aren't. So when I bring it up, it's almost like a bulletproof vest. They say, "Well, I can't get through that," so they
Well, it's
throw up
also
their
an
arms and they go
uncomfortable
home.
territory.
What's that?
It's also an uncomfortable territory for them.
Well, yeah, because how do they justify suppressing my rights without justifying suppressing their own?
Yeah.
Honestly, how? They can't.
And that's why I say, in order to oppose your oppression, you have to oppose all oppression. I don't
Yes.
like that fucking Spencer got punched in the ear. I don't like that person gets shot outside of the Milo event. I don't like that the guy who burns the flag because fuck Republicans gets stomped. I'll stomp my flag, I'll stomp your ass. Well, you clearly don't give a shit about the Constitution, so why should anybody else?
Right. Exactly. And, it's like when it was one of the big TV networks who tried to do a they tried to do one of their expose things. It was during the Bush administration. It was like a 2020 or a 48 hours type show.
Yeah.
And they went into a little deli, I think it was, or some sort of a deli restaurant, something owned by some Muslims. And they planted a guy in there to stir up shit against these people who owned the place, to see how the people would react. And almost universally, the people told the guy, if you don't like it, here, leave. This is America. We have the right to we have freedom of religion in this country. If you don't like it, get out of here. No one's keeping you here. But then someone in the military came in, and he really let into the guy. These people have freedom of religion. This is what I fight for. If you don't like it, you can leave. Pack up your shit and go. And I think the people who were conducting the study, if you want to call it that, were kind of upset that it turned out that way. I think they wanted to.
That sounds like a CBS joint. So clearly, yeah, they would want more government interference.
Well, no, they wanted to find racism where there was none. They wanted to find religious intolerance where there was none. They had to plant a guy to stir the shit, to get the shit to the surface, and there was no shit to rise.
But that's what they do, though. Like these social experiment people, they don't prove society's a way. They prove that society's a way once you act away. And like that's just telling people don't be an asshole. That does anybody rational is just going to say don't be an asshole.
Right. But they're not targeting the rational.
Yeah.
They're targeting morons. And they have a hell of a field of targets.
And they make more of them every day by saying, don't think about it. Just do what we tell you. And, we've got you covered.
Yeah. Listen and believe.
Listen and believe.
Yeah. You think listen and believe is just a feminist mantra? Hell no. It's government mantra too.
Yeah.
I mean, shit, at every level. This is why I tell people all the time, if you're going to vote for someone locally and you hope to have a real impact, hold the people running for sheriff to the fire. Hold their feet to the fire during their campaign. And I know you don't agree with it on this level, but I'm going to say it this way anyway, because this is how I always say it. Always tell them, hold that guy to the fire. Ask him where he stands on the Bill of Rights. Ask him where he stands on the Constitution.
Well, it's sort of like drugs, man. If they're not willing to stay clean, they shouldn't arrest anybody for drugs. And if they're not willing to follow the Constitution, they shouldn't carry a badge.
That's right. Exactly. That's exactly the point I try to make. And the reason I say sheriff is because it's an elected position. It's the only elected position locally in law enforcement. And that's the guy who's going to be beholden to the people. And the sheriff actually has a lot of authority to uphold the Constitution if they so choose. And I really wish more of them would. And that's why every this last election cycle when the local newspapers on their Facebook pages are saying are telling us who's running for president, for sheriff. And I was in there every day. Where does so and so stand on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights? And I never got any. The newspapers, the news media doesn't want to ask those questions.
Yeah.
Or they would already. They wouldn't need me to tell them that they should. They simply don't want to ask those questions.
And that's what we should all do. We should ask questions at all levels of government. And I firmly believe that when we ask those questions, we'll want even less of it until that number is 0.
Yeah, I believe so too. Well, it's not just asking the questions. It's what answers are you getting too.
And what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, because they're going to give you an answer that's not an answer that covers nothing.
Yeah.
They're going to talk around it. You're going to ask them, what do you think of the war on drugs? They're going to be like, well, addiction rates in 2015 had gone up. And it's like, okay, what do you think about the war on drugs? That's my system is, so I'll let them answer. I'll let them waste their time and I'll follow it up with the very same question. Okay. So what do you think about the war on drugs?
Yeah.
I mean, can you justify it constitutionally? They don't like that, and they don't like that question. They never do. Another thing that I don't know what it's like where you live, but here the schools are always asking for more money through
everywhere
millages, through millage. Yeah, I think so too. Through millages and little 2-year tax schemes and all that kind of garbage. And I'm always saying, hey, let's see what they've been doing with the money for the last 10 years. How come you people in the press aren't trying to give us that information?
Yeah.
And again, I get no response. But I'm going to keep asking, and eventually, hopefully, the name Mitch the Ripper will get big enough. They'll say, shit, we better start answering some of these questions.
Well, hey, I'll be happy to be on as many of these broadcasts as necessary to make that happen, because I'm getting much bigger this year. I can tell you that.
Oh, that's what it looks like to me too. I mean, it looks like I don't know where I'm going to go, because I don't push. I don't tell people like, subscribe, and throw me money yet. But I do plan to in the next few months.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm with you, because this is a little longer than the hour that I planned. But it's good conversation too. So I got stuck into it. What can I say?
Hey, if you have video editing software, you can just chop it up into somewhat smaller videos as well, and then distribute those as specific topical videos. I noticed Milo was doing that, and I really like that idea.
Yeah, I thought about doing that. The problem is I don't know what to make of my I've been having issues with my ISP. So it's I just had like a 3-minute video, took me like 5 hours to upload.
Yeah.
So that kind of shit, I got to address some things before I really get into all of that.
Well, hey,
but yeah,
it was good talking with you though.
Oh yeah, it was a blast, man. I'm glad to have you on. Are you this week at Wednesday at 12 p.m.? Sorry, had to do it on journalisticrevolution.com. Moment of Rage. Are you gonna be able to hit your full time slot to this week, or?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's gonna be hard not to. I've already got some recordings down.
Oh, right on. Cool. Because I'm looking forward to that. Because I was waiting for like 20 minutes. And I'm going, come on, man, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Because I was really interested in seeing that or hearing that.
Well, it'll be better this week. I can guarantee that. I've got much more time.
I'm sure it will, and I'm looking forward to it. And I'm sure anyone who's familiar with you is looking forward to it as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
All right, so yeah, let's call it a night, because I'm having certain bodily requirements that need to be met.
Yeah, me too, honestly.
Right on. I'll catch you later, Jeremiah. Thanks for coming on.
All right, hey, be well, and check chat. There's something in there for you.
Oh no. This could be scary.